The story begins with a small girl with orange hair, waking up in a luxurious room only to find herself in a small crib. She opens and closes her eyes slowly, then contemplates her tiny hands and sock-covered feet as she lies there, overcome by a sense of wonder and astonishment. She stands in her crib to look at her reflection in a large ornate mirror, only to be surprised by her appearance as a young child with wide blue eyes, while warm sunlight floods the place. A wave of shock overwhelms her, and panic settles on her features as she realizes she has traveled back in time once again. The events return to the beginning, where everything had started with a divine revelation. In a majestic hall, a prophecy was announced stating that the child born on the 29th of February, who awakens the power of the Almighty God, would be the one to save the world. Based on this revelation, the imperial family and the holy sect embarked on a diligent search for that chosen child. Their search spanned various places, from luxurious palaces to public squares. Ultimately, they found the one they believed to be the promised child of fate. That child was the protagonist of the story herself, identified by her birth on the specified date and her possession of holy power. By order of the imperial family, she was adopted by a noble family to begin a new life. Meanwhile, the temple took responsibility for teaching and training her to use her alleged powers. Despite constant monitoring, no change or development appeared in her holy power, which disappointed everyone, while she hoped for even the slightest progress. In the end, she failed to awaken the awaited divine inscription. As the temple and the imperial family abandoned her, sinking into despair, she found herself alone facing a dark fate. Amidst this despair, another girl appeared, the true child of fate. With the appearance of the real child, she realized she was a fake. She was accused of deception and delusion, condemned by everyone, and eventually met her death as a sacrifice to seal the god of evil. But unexpectedly, events began to reverse as if time itself were rewinding. She suddenly opened her eyes to find she had returned to the age of 4, lying in her small crib once again. The first time she returned, she felt immense joy, and thanked fate for giving her a new chance, determined to live her life correctly this time. But she did not succeed. She died again and returned once more to the age of 4. As the tragedy repeated, she realized while crying in her bed that this was her 4th life. After having memorized the course of events by heart, she lay in her bed, calmly expecting the imminent arrival of the Empress Dowager. As she expected, the time came when the maids told her she must choose the father, who would adopt her. The day she chose him was the starting point every time she returned to life, and the first option was Duke Amity, the noble hero who protects the imperial order. The second option was Duke Valois, who came from an ancient family famous for producing scholars. The third option was Duke Doubled, the greatest villain who possessed incomparable military power and wealth. She recalled memories of her first life when her choice fell on Duke Amity. As rumors suggested, he was a kind man loved by his people, and she had looked at him then with admiration and appreciation. She clearly remembers how she once presented him with a red flower and a thank you card as an expression of her gratitude. But despite his apparent kindness, she felt a barrier between them. Being an orphan, her happiness lay only in having a father, even if he was busy and away from her most of the time. This remained the case until Mina, the true child of fate, appeared and expressed her deep admiration for the Duke. The Duke adopted her immediately, as it was said she greatly resembled his late first love, becoming his new daughter. Soon the two became very close, with Mina boasting about being the Duke's daughter. Thus, the girl found herself completely alone and outcast by everyone. Things deteriorated further when she found herself behind prison bars, screaming her innocence against the charge of attempting to poison Mina. But no one believed her. Instead, she was described as a lying monster. After being falsely accused, her adoptive father came to express his disdain for her. With a cold gaze, he demanded she become a sacrifice if she were truly repentant. He ordered her to make a noble sacrifice for Mina and the entire world. Thus, she faced her first death, where the Grim Reaper welcomed her. Then she returned to life again, waking up terrified in her bed at the age of 4. Now, in her 4th life, she considers her options, wondering if she were mad to return to the Amity family after all she had suffered. So, she remembered that in her 2nd life, she chose Duke Valois, who welcomed her along with his family, but his kind appearance was deceptive. He was a bad person, always scolding her for her failure to awaken the divine inscription. His wife also spread rumors about her being a fake child. In the end, the Duke described her as a useless girl. She met her death once again, to the surprise of the Grim Reaper himself. In her 3rd life, she tried to escape, but as a lone child with nothing, she could not survive. She died of hunger in the streets, only for the Grim Reaper to find her again, demanding that she stop dying. Now, in her present, she ruled out the option of Duke Amity and Duke Valois, realizing that running away was not a solution. Only one final choice remained, which she made with determination and resolve. This sparked the surprise and wonder of the maids. She found herself in front of a luxurious and majestic palace. Her choice was Duke Doubled, the infamous villain of the Empire, who looked at her with contempt and wondered if she were something to be eaten. One of the Duke's aides informed him that there was an imperial decree from the Empress Dowager asking him to adopt the child, but the Duke responded coldly, considering that the Empress had lost her mind, and ordered the child to be returned immediately. Despite his refusal, she was brought before him to look at the man named Theodore Doubled, that villain who is said to possess the greatest wealth in the Empire. She admired his breathtaking beauty, giving him a full score, and wondered to herself why such a handsome man remained single all his life after his wife's death several years ago. Meanwhile, the Duke's aide tried to persuade him to accept the child, hinting that this might be an opportunity to mend relations with the Holy Sect, and that refusing the Empress Dowager's request might complicate things later. But she knew the aide was wrong. Through everything she had learned about him, she knew for certain that threats from the papacy or the Empress Dowager would be of no use to him at all. She had to find a way to survive here. She had chosen this family intentionally for its vast wealth, and because she believed they would not care about her, which served her plan. Her plan was to collect money and then flee the entire empire. Her true goal was exile, where she imagined herself relaxing on a tropical beach at sunset, happy to have escaped that chaotic country. To collect the necessary funds for exile, she realized she must cling to Duke Doubled with all her might. To achieve this, she decided to offer him valuable information, so she struggled to utter a phrase warning him of a sudden tax audit that would occur on the 7th of December. But because of her childish pronunciation, the Duke and his aide did not understand what she was trying to say, which frustrated her. She felt despair, as her growth was slower than other children, affecting her speech. And that information was her only trump card for survival. Suddenly, the Duke grabbed her and lifted her to his eye level, repeating her words clearly and asking about an unannounced tax audit on December 7th, which greatly surprised her because he understood her. In an attempt to hide her shock, she placed her finger on her lips and whispered that it was a secret. She wished in her heart that her plan would succeed this time. She hoped he would see her usefulness and silently pleaded with him to adopt her. Later, the Duke asked his aide about the progress in organizing accounting records, but the aide seemed skeptical, wondering why the Duke would believe information from a 4-year-old child. The child realized the gravity of the information she provided. Huge losses would befall the Doubled family because of this audit, which was enticing enough to catch the attention of a Duke like him. In a sharp tone, the Duke wondered with a piercing gaze whether it was normal for a 4-year-old to know a term like unannounced tax audit. The terrified aide replied that he would check into the matter immediately, while waiting anxiously, wondering if her plan had succeeded or not. The Duke sat on his throne and remarked that he smelled a scrawny, sick filly, then ordered a bath to be prepared for her. Terror filled her heart, fearing this was a prelude to washing her and sending her back from where she came, and that her information was not enough to convince him. In a moment of despair, she ran toward him, ignoring the aide's surprise. Then she jumped and clung directly to the Duke's leg. He looked at her in shock and asked what she was doing. She responded with a bright smile and open arms, asking him to carry her. The Duke grabbed her coldly by her clothes, asking her not to make a fuss. But inside she was screaming in fear, refusing the idea of death and returning in time once more. She resolved that she would eat only a little and would never allow herself to think about obtaining love. Then she hugged the Duke tightly, expressing her admiration for him in her childish accent. She clung to him, pleading for him to let her stay. As she hugged him, she hoped in her heart that he would fall for her trap and accept her staying. These events take place in the vast Wizentra Empire, which possesses the widest lands in the world. In this empire, there were 3 great powers at the top of the pyramid. The first was the official state religion, Nereid. The second was the ruling imperial family. The third was the 5 great ducal families. But this triple balance of power was destined to witness a radical change when she reached 15 years of age, where one family would emerge to push aside the 5 ducal families and become one of the main pillars of power in the empire. In the midst of this mighty family, she found herself currently residing as an honored guest. She felt relieved that she was not expelled and was allowed to stay in the castle for the time being, but she realized that the next step was the most important to ensure her survival. In one scene, she was talking to the Duke's followers who seemed confused, wondering what she meant by hat uncle. With a childish smile and stuttering pronunciation, she explained to them that what they were looking for was located in the ancient Auric Alchem Plains. Shock and confusion appeared on the men's faces at her incomprehensible words, but soon their confusion turned into enthusiasm and admiration. They realized she was paying the rent for her stay with valuable information about the temple and the imperial family. One of them praised her for her cunning, while she thought to herself that she couldn't take this information to the grave anyway, and that the temple's misery is her happiness. The Duke's followers were talking among themselves, considering these clues as proof that she was the promised child of fate. But she knew in her heart that this was all false, and that her memories from her previous lives were a powerful weapon, but one with limits. It was difficult to maintain adult thinking in a child's body, perhaps because her brain was not yet fully developed. When she is not hungry or tired, she can think like an adult and use her memories to become rich. But when hunger or fatigue takes over, she goes back to acting like a child who only wants milk. Once, one of the followers approached her expressing deep admiration for her, which terrified her by his sudden touch. For this reason, she would cling to the Duke while one of the followers looked at her sadly. The followers noticed that despite her extreme shyness with strangers, she became unexpectedly attached to the Duke and did not talk about the secrets of the temple and the imperial family, except while sitting in his lap. Her fear of adult men was not intentional. It stemmed from the memories of the abuse she suffered, but she felt a strange comfort in the Duke's company. The Duke asked her to get down and sit, and she responded immediately. After sharing precious stories with them, one of the followers thanked her and gave her a piece of candy, which she was very happy with. As the follower walked away singing about the cuteness of his daughter, she was struggling to open the candy wrapper. Suddenly, the Duke took the candy from her hand to help her, but she was shocked and her eyes filled with tears. Believing that no matter how evil he was, stealing candy from a child was a terrible thing. But she was surprised when the Duke, after opening the candy, placed it in her mouth. Then he quietly asked her if she would tell him his family's secrets if he gave her candy, even if they were in the capital, using the candy as a means to get information from her. She answered him firmly, denying his request while shaking her head. When he asked her why, she answered in a confident, childish tone that she was on the Duke's side. A slight smile appeared on the Duke's face for a moment. One of the maids who came to pick her up noticed that smile and wondered to herself if he had truly smiled. The Duke ordered the maid to make sure the child didn't wander around and make a fuss. As the maid carried her away, the child thought it was impossible for a cold-blooded man like him to smile. But then she thought that even if he were a cold-blooded man, he was still a good choice. Duke Doubled is the master of this place that resembles heaven. The maids surrounded her with attention, offering her puzzles, horse riding, and the most delicious food. Happiness overwhelmed her, and she felt that this place was truly heaven. Several days passed since she began living in the castle, and to ensure a quiet life under the care of the Doubled family, she performed many maneuvers behind the scenes. Among them was winning the favor of the influential maid, Ringda, as she would circle her happily whenever she saw her. She succeeded in completely subduing her when she whispered to her that she loved her more than anyone else. She also won the heart of the snack manager Dahlia when she gave her a precious piece of candy saying it was for her alone. Also, she succeeded in gaining her favor when she whispered the same secret to her, that she loved her more than others. Finally, she was able to win the favor of Ciso, the daily records officer, when she expressed her sadness if she got hurt. As usual, she completed her mission successfully when she told her she was her favorite. Thus, she became beloved by all the maids. She was confident in her plan. Even if the master of the house hated her, as happened in the Valois Palace, the maids would help her. But the best thing about this place was the presence of Leah, who would come to her kindly to tell her it was time for her nap. One night, she heard some servants wondering why a child rumored to be fake was brought to the castle, and that her divine power was extremely low. But Leah interrupted them angrily, scolding them for their insolence in speaking ill of a child. She realized then that Leah was kind to her even when she did nothing to win her favor. When Leah put her in her bed wishing her sweet dreams, she felt a strange warmth. She wondered as she fell asleep in the warmth whether this was the feeling of having a mother. She woke up suddenly to the sound of her hungry stomach growling. She realized this was bad, for her intense hunger made her unable to maintain her adult thinking. Due to her neglect of this matter, she made a fatal mistake, as she did not wake up despite the maid's attempts to wake her. When her mind regresses, she becomes a troublesome child who only wants to eat. Despite knowing she should not move recklessly at night, the impulse was stronger than her. She could not maintain an adult mindset and ended up acting like a child. At that moment, memories from her time in Duke Valois' palace flooded her, when she was locked in the attic for several days. Painful memories of starvation and death took over, so she decided she would not give in to hunger this time, and began devouring the potatoes she found with great greed. But she was surprised by the appearance of two maids who seemed strict and scolded her sharply, wondering if there was a beggar living in her stomach, which made her stop eating in a state of shock and fear. This moment brought her back to horrific memories of starving to death, and passing scenes of a lady giving her son food in the street. She looked at the food in her hands longingly. Fear took over her, and she felt that she would inevitably die of hunger. Realizing that her thinking as an adult was no longer useful in the face of this terror, driven by a desperate need for food, she decided to search for something to satisfy her hunger herself. She slipped through the dark corridors of the palace and descended the stairs very carefully, looking around her. After reaching the bottom, she opened a door that seemed to lead to a storeroom or kitchen. Inside, she found a plate with a piece of bread, which was exactly what she was looking for. Happiness overwhelmed her, and she resolved to return quickly to her room to eat the bread, realizing she would be in trouble if her wandering was discovered. But on her way back, she suddenly bumped into someone. She looked up and saw a man with purple hair and a sharp gaze standing before her. It was the Duke himself, which caused her extreme shock and terror. In a moment of terror, a story Mina had told her in the past jumped into her mind. The story was about a man named Jean Valjean, who was punished for stealing bread. Mina had concluded the story dramatically and tragically, claiming the man had been executed, which increased the child's terror and her imagination of the worst consequences. She returned to the bitter reality, wondering in panic what she should do. With a cold, piercing gaze, the Duke asked her what she was doing in his castle. She shrank back and prostrated herself on the ground in extreme fear, trying to hide the piece of bread, believing she might die this time. The Duke wondered about her cleverness despite her young age and whether she truly was the child of fate. She answered him in a trembling and broken voice in the affirmative, but he responded coldly, saying he hates liars, especially those who feign innocence with weak lies about being on his side. He added in a threatening tone, wondering about the best way to deal with a rat like her. The child collapsed in fear, crying and apologizing, declaring she had done wrong. The man strictly asked her what she had stolen. She answered while trembling that she had stolen something. The Duke began guessing what she had stolen, wondering if it was money or a holy artifact, but she kept shaking her head in denial while crying. Then he wondered if it were military secrets. He shouted at her angrily to speak out what she had stolen. With great hesitation, she raised the piece of bread she was hiding and tried to utter the word, bread. The Duke looked at the piece of bread in shock. The child found herself in the presence of the Duke, who sat with dignity, while she ate the piece of bread she had found, and the maid stood behind her anxiously. Leah, the head of the servants, explained to the Duke that the child had fallen asleep early and missed her meal. So the Duke concluded from the situation that, because of her hunger, she had picked up and eaten bread that the servants had discarded. Extreme shame overwhelmed Leah and the rest of the maids, and they felt sorrow for their neglect. The Duke reached out his hand toward her, perhaps in an unintentional gesture, but it sparked her extreme terror. So she moved away from him, terrified, and clung to Leah tightly, leaving him confused under the gaze of the anxious maids. The Duke wondered why she acted this way after having been so attached to him. One of the aides explained that the child was likely afraid because she believed she was being scolded for what she had done. In Leah's warm embrace, the child was crying, not because she hated the Duke, but because she had felt comfortable with him before. But what happened earlier made her truly believe she was on the verge of death. Leah embraced the child tenderly, trying to calm her. Then she stood with rare courage and firmly declared that the child must finish her meal and that she would take her now, supported by the gazes of the rest of the servants ready to defend her. The servants looked at their master with anticipation and fear, expecting an angry reaction. Silence and tension prevailed in the place while the servants watched their master, but the Duke unexpectedly, calmly agreed to her request. The servants left quickly, feeling immense relief. Outside, the maids praised Leah's courage, admitting they thought they would die. The child stood before Leah and the maids and apologized in a low voice for being hungry all the time. But Leah embraced her kindly, assuring her that children need plenty of eating and sleeping. Tears flooded the child's eyes as she realized her desire to stay in this place, specifically because of Leah's presence. After a few days since the bread incident, tranquility prevailed in the child's life, as she was greeted with warm salutations from all the servants in the palace. The maids found her extremely kind in her daily interactions. Her life continued in peace until she met the Duke and his aide in one of the corridors. She tried to slip away, hesitantly claiming she had to study, fearing she would be expelled if she caused any disturbance. But the Duke stopped her, asking her to wait, so she froze in her place and answered in fear. The aide whispered to his master that she was still afraid and suggested he call her by her name kindly to gain her trust. But the child thought to herself that the aide was wrong and that the Duke probably didn't even know her name. Instead, the Duke ordered her to follow him and the aide led her gently. The Duke stopped in front of a huge ornate door which piqued her curiosity. Then he turned to her as he opened the door and said he would give her this thing. The child wondered in confusion and astonishment about the nature of the thing the Duke would present to her. But when she looked beyond the door, she found nothing but an empty room. So looks of concern slipped into her eyes as she looked around. In a moment of terror, the worst-case scenario came to her mind. She imagined that the Duke was ordering her to be locked in that room so she wouldn't cause any more trouble. So her body trembled with fear because this wasn't what she was seeking. The Duke and his aide noticed her condition, so the Duke asked why she was trembling, and the aide replied that he believed she must still be afraid. The Duke looked at her with a calm gaze, then called her by her name for the first time. LeBlaine. A huge shock hit her. The Duke had known her name all along, which was something she never expected. Then he reached out his hand to her, holding a shiny piece of candy, and told her there was plenty of it inside. Her fear turned into wonder and joy as she looked at the candy in his hand. When she looked inside the room, she discovered it wasn't empty at all. Rather, it was a real treasure full of all kinds of candy and baked goods. From her immense happiness, she found herself falling into a sea of sweets that covered the entire floor of the room, and she began devouring the candy with great happiness, while the Duke and his aide looked at her in complete astonishment. She realized she had completely lost her mind and immersed herself in the fantasy scene before her, for the room was like something out of a fairy tale. But she felt it was unfair to eat all this alone, so she stepped toward the Duke and offered him a piece of candy. The Duke seemed surprised by her gesture, while she continued eating until her cheeks puffed out. The Duke remarked that her appearance was strange, so she misunderstood his comment and wondered angrily what he had said. He explained his meaning while touching her puffed cheek gently, likening her to a squirrel whose cheeks were about to burst. So she thought to herself that she would overlook the matter since he was the master of the house. She resolved to build a good relationship with him to ensure her survival, and decided to show him the survival skills of someone in their fourth life, and with a charming smile, she thanked him for the candy. A slight smile appeared on the Duke's face as he answered briefly with satisfaction. After the candy incident, a period of calm and peace prevailed in her life at the palace. The incidents that occurred were nothing but simple childish matters, such as when Leah caught her red-handed eating 7 pieces of the Duke's candy, reminding her of her promise to eat only 1 piece a day and warning her that her teeth would decay. On another occasion, she received a gift from one of the old followers, which was a cute bag in the shape of an elephant, sparking her joy as she ran around with it, happily announcing to the maids that Grandpa gave it to her. She considered the bag perfect for her future escape bag, so her life was full of such simple moments. But one day, she found herself wondering why the maids were taking extra care in decorating her and putting an elegant ribbon in her hair. Leah told her with a warm smile that today was the date of her official presentation to the Duke's followers. The maids expressed their excitement and told her the place would be teeming with people, and that there was also a child the family planned to sponsor, which might give her a chance to make a friend. And the word sponsorship piqued her curiosity. The sponsorship system was ostensibly a traditional project for social contribution among noble families, but she knew its reality was different. It was essentially a system for discovering talent, aimed at raising gifted children to become the ideal individuals the sponsoring family desired. The children included in the sponsorship received various forms of support, such as education and the tools necessary for developing their talents. This sponsorship system granted the chosen children a systematic education based on accumulated data, in addition to the chance to integrate into the high society built by the sponsoring family. Furthermore, the children received massive financial support, and for this reason, the more powerful the sponsoring family was, the more seeking and competition there was to obtain its sponsorship. At present, even the children of rural nobles could obtain a sponsorship opportunity by high-level nobles. While Leah was preparing to escort her, LeBlanc was thinking that the child a powerful family like Doubled would sponsor must be someone amazing. Wondering to herself about his identity, she walked with Leah in the luxurious corridor, and as they approached the reception hall, Leah pointed to his presence. He was a blonde-haired boy named Jude, receiving the attending nobles gracefully, greeting them by their names and titles accurately, which sparked their deep admiration for his early intelligence. LeBlanc felt she had to leave a good impression as well, so she stepped forward and gave a greeting with a bright, childish smile. She succeeded in drawing the attention of the nobles who were impressed by her cuteness, expressing their surprise at this beautiful child who was so good at giving greetings. But when her eyes fell on the boy, Jude, clearly a violent shock hit her. For this boy, she recognized him immediately. His innocent features hid a wicked smile, and she remembered he was one of the worst people she had ever met. Marco Jude. Her memory went back to her second life when she was the daughter of Duke Valois and joined the academy. There, one of the professors summoned her to his office. That was Jude praising her. Excellent grades in that semester. But his motives were wicked. He was harassing her relentlessly, coveting to become the son-in-law of Duke Valois, and his behavior was extremely disgusting. She could no longer bear his actions, so she decided to report him. But he turned the tables on her and accused her of being the one who seduced him. He tried to convince others with weak arguments, wondering why she didn't report him from the beginning if she were truly bothered. But at that time, she didn't understand what was happening at first, and she never imagined that a man 10 years older than her and her professor could carry such ill intentions. It reached the point that he scolded her, saying that if she truly hated it, she would have screamed and that she must have enjoyed it. The truth was that she felt so terrified that her body froze and she couldn't even scream. In the end, her protests were ignored, and his only punishment was a deduction from his salary for only 6 months. While she was branded with immodesty and expelled from the academy, finding herself alone outside the gates carrying her bag. Back in the present, she was listening to Jude speaking confidently before the nobles, so anger burned in her chest, and she felt a strong desire to slap him. But she tried to calm herself down, reminding herself that he was still just a child, and that she would look crazy if she hit him because of actions he would commit in the future. Jude continued boasting, claiming he had devised some equations with his teacher, which impressed the attendees who found the matter amazing. But she knew in her heart he was a liar. He was known for his stupidity in the academy, and she remembered how he would resort to his father to solve his problems for him. She concluded that just as in the academy, his parents must have paid a real genius to devise those equations for him. She was forced to sit next to Jude on one sofa, which increased her tension. He looked at her with a cunning smile and asked if she saw what he saw, so her confusion increased. While he was looking around to see if anyone was listening to them, Jude approached her and whispered in her ear insulting words, saying that a fake person like her could never defeat him. His words sparked her confusion, and she wondered if this child truly felt threatened by a small child, only to realize he thought she was a competitor for the sponsorship opportunity. She decided to ignore him at first, trying to maintain her calm and think about other things. But he continued harassing her, saying he heard she was a pathetic child and that the Empress Dowager was the one who threw her in the doubled trash can. Then he added with a wicked smile that she was trash just like them. His words brought her back to her weakness in her previous lives, where she was foolish and naive, afraid of the world she was thrown into alone. She couldn't respond to the insults and would only lower her head, but she was no longer that weak girl. The person who died 3 times and is living her 4th life now is completely different. So in a sudden and swift movement, she punched his face hard. Shock hit all the attendees, from the servants to the nobles. She didn't stop at one punch. Rather, she continued delivering consecutive punches to his face, until she eventually knocked him to the ground. While the maid celebrated her victory as if she were in a boxing ring, Jude's father stood up, shocked by what happened, wondering about the meaning of this behavior. He rushed to his son to ask if he was okay. Jude tried to justify the situation to his father, claiming that crazy girl had attacked him suddenly. LeBlaine interrupted him while pointing her finger at him and shouting in her childish accent that he was a bad boy. The attending nobles were surprised by her words and didn't understand what she meant, so she explained loudly that she was here because Doubled is trash, which was understood as she came here because Jude said the Doubled family is trash. Silence and calm prevailed in the hall while Jude's father was trying to calm his son, and the servants were looking at her. LeBlaine began feeling anxious, wondering if she had made a mistake, fearing the Duke would get angry and consider Violent's behavior unsuitable for an aristocrat. But she was surprised when she saw the servants and followers crying from being moved, considering she had gotten angry for their sake and that she was a true angel. Their reaction puzzled her, for all she wanted was to hit Marco. Meanwhile, Jude was shouting, denying what she said, claiming it was impossible that he would say something like that, and that she was lying. Here, Duke Doubled intervened with a cold gaze, wondering about that thing, and how he dared insult a child under his protection. Jude's father tried to remedy the situation, claiming it was just a slip of the tongue from his son because of his frustration. He added that it was impossible for his son to refer to the Doubled family in this insulting way. The Duke looked at Jude coldly and said he would give him a chance since his father insisted on that. Then he asked him with a terrifying threat whether he could swear to the truth of his words, even if he burned his thighs and plucked out his eyes, and that if he did that, he would overlook the disturbance he caused in his presence. He added that if he couldn't prove his truthfulness, the matter wouldn't end with him alone, which hit Jude with extreme terror. Then the Duke asked him again in a calm and terrifying voice if his child was lying, or if she was telling the truth. The cunning Marco couldn't withstand the prestige of Duke Doubled, and he began stuttering, trying to tell the truth. LeBlaine watched the situation with confidence, knowing that it was impossible for Jude to dare lie in the Duke's face. Indeed, Jude tremblingly confessed that what LeBlaine said was the truth. His father was terrified by his confession. Then the father fell to his knees before the Duke, pleading for mercy and admitting that he had committed a sin deserving of death. But the Duke coldly ordered the guards to get rid of them, referring to the father and his son. Thus, they were dragged away by the guards while screaming for mercy. The scene was majestic, as the child stood confidently against a boy larger than her in size, explaining the situation calmly, which earned the admiration of the Duke's followers. But they did not understand the truth of what had happened, and they imagined a scenario of their own. They thought that Jude had bullied her, and that as a guest in the palace, she could not stir up trouble, and that she endured his personal insult, but she could not endure his insult to the Doubled family. So they imagined her bravely defending the family's honor. She looked at them with an innocent smile, realizing that this was what they believed, and decided to take advantage of the situation, even though her conscience pricked her a little. She looked on the bright side as she had succeeded in leaving a good impression on the Duke's close assistants, and she wondered as she sat on the Duke's lap whether she had left a good impression on him as well, for he had defended her in the end. She was surprised when she found one of the assistants stroking her hair, commenting on her cuteness, so she recoiled in fear. The followers noticed this and talked among themselves about her shyness around adult men and how she only allowed the Duke to carry her, concluding that this was due to her great love for him. One of the assistants felt happy because he was so beloved, commenting that she only smiles for the Duke. The rest of the followers joined them, expressing their intense envy of him, and how those who have everything never know the sorrow of those who have nothing. But the Duke commented with a sly smile that it was annoying, which left her frustrated, as she was only trying to get along with him, but he considered it a mere nuisance. But as they say, after hardship comes ease. After the followers began to admire her, many things changed, including her obtaining permission to go out. Even the administrators who had never seen her before started to take an interest in her, and she felt overjoyed because she was going out to buy some things she needed. She wandered through the crowded market accompanied by Leia, enjoying the festive atmosphere. A toy store caught her attention, so she stopped in front of it. She remembered a rabbit-shaped doll that was going to be a huge success at that time. That doll would say, "I love you," when hugged tightly. It was very popular in her first life as well. Her memory went back to that life when she stood in front of the same store and wished her father, Duke Aemite, would get her that doll. But he refused her request, saying that the money that would buy the doll could be donated to save countless hungry people. LeBlaine remembers how Duke Aemite asked her then if she still wanted the doll, and she answered in the negative while lowering her head. So he praised her, considering her behavior noble, and told her that instead of the doll, she had gained empathy and consideration for others. But in truth, she wanted that doll desperately. Years later, when she reached 18, Duke Aemite gave that same doll to Mina, as he watched Mina rejoice with the doll like a child. A smile brighter than the one on the day he taught her about consideration for others appeared on his face. LeBlaine decided to get rid of this painful memory and not think about that time anymore. At that moment, Leah interrupted her thoughts and kindly offered to buy her a toy since they were out. Leblin was happy with the kindness of Leah, who thought she was looking at the toys because she wanted one. They entered the store, and Leah told her she could choose anything she wanted. This excited the other maids who were with them, and Leblin began to wander through the store enthusiastically. While she was wandering, her eyes fell on something else. It was a brooch in the shape of a red carnation. She suddenly remembered that Appreciation Day was coming soon. It is a day when children present flowers to their parents as a token of gratitude. She thought it would be nice to buy a gift for them, but toys seemed like an inappropriate choice. Although the wooden toys on display looked fun, she decided not to waste this precious opportunity on toys. She pointed to the pin, but Leah explained to her in confusion that this was not a toy, but a carnation-shaped brooch. So Leblin told her she wanted to buy it as a gift for someone the orphanage children loved very much. While Leah was wondering about the identity of this person, Leblin was secretly planning to give the brooch to Leah herself on the upcoming Appreciation Day, hoping she would reward her with more snacks. She thought about giving it to the Duke, but she remembered his cold reaction earlier when she expressed her feelings, and how he considered it a mere nuisance. So she feared she would annoy him and lose her favor with him. Leah agreed to buy the pin, and Leblin decided to give it to her as a surprise. Later at the palace, one of the followers noticed the carnation pin decorating another follower's clothes. When someone asked him if he had received it from his daughter, he answered with pride and great happiness. He explained that his daughter had placed it for him, saying that tomorrow is Appreciation Day, and he felt that this is the true happiness in life, and that nothing equals the joy of raising children. The other followers agreed with him, wondering about the use of honor and wealth compared to the happiness of children's affection. Then one of them turned to the Duke, who was watching them silently, and told him that he must have felt the same happiness when he received a carnation. They added that they pity those who have never received a carnation before, and that those who do not feel this happiness have no use for their lives, and they asked him if he agreed with them. But the Duke answered with a sharp coldness that he did not know that feeling. The Duke's followers were stunned by his definitive answer, and wondered how that could be. The Duke explained coldly that he had never received a carnation in his life. Their shock increased. They could not believe he had never received one, especially since he has 3 sons, and they wondered about the coldness of the doubled family. One of the followers tried to lighten the mood, saying that boys are not delicate by nature and are satisfied with saying, "Thank you." But the Duke replied with even greater coldness, saying that he hadn't even heard the word "thank you" from them. The followers felt embarrassed and realized that the Duke was becoming more embarrassed the more they talked about it. At that moment, Leblin appeared walking down the hall with Leah, carrying a bouquet of red carnations. The followers cried out in joy upon seeing her, and pointed out to the Duke that it was a carnation. They were overjoyed, believing that the Duke would finally receive a carnation, and that Leblin must be so grateful to him that she bought the flowers herself. A faint smile appeared on the Duke's face as he agreed with them that carnations are a source of joy. The followers suggested to Leblin that she take the flowers to him now while the opportunity was ripe. Leblin felt embarrassed, as this was the first time she was presenting carnations, especially since she remembered how Duke Amite rejected her in the past. She stepped toward Leah, presented the flowers to her, and thanked her, which surprised Leah, who wondered if the flowers were for her. A dead silence prevailed, and the expressions of the followers froze, while a cold and terrifying look appeared on the Duke's face. The followers realized their mistake and retreated, whispering that they did not know the flowers were for the maid. Leblin ran happily toward Leah, who thanked her and promised to cherish her gift. After Leah hugged her, she felt a slight pain in the back of her head, wondering why. Suddenly, she heard the Duke calling her name in an icy tone. She trembled with fear as she answered him. He asked her coldly if there was nothing for him. She was confused and quickly answered in the negative, then salvaged the situation with an affected smile, justifying her action by saying she didn't want to bother him, and that she had acted correctly, right? Amidst the tension of the followers and the Duke's anger, Leah took her hand to return inside. That evening, an order was issued to cancel Appreciation Day throughout the doubled territories, leaving Leblin and everyone else confused. Days passed and Leblin was enjoying her time in her room. She was watching Leah from afar and noticed that she loved the carnation pin she gave her very much. She had been carrying it with her carefully for several days. One day, an assistant came to her and asked if she would like to go to the Duke's office. She jumped up enthusiastically and agreed immediately, for today was the set date to inform the Empress Dowager about her well-being. The assistant noticed that she seemed energetic today. As she walked with him, the maids bid her farewell, wishing her a safe journey. When Leblin entered the Duke's office with the assistant, she noticed a strange box and asked about it. The assistant told her that they were organizing the gifts presented to the Emperor on the occasion of his birthday, so she remembered that at this time every year, nobles were crazily busy preparing gifts. Even Duke Amite, who did not care for small gains, was keen to present a decent gift, as was Duke Valois, who went so far as to borrow money to exaggerate the preparation of gifts. Valois spent lavishly on such occasions, but he was extremely stingy in other matters, especially with her. She remembered how she once, out of ignorance, bought an expensive ink pen. He beat her violently and called her a parasite living at the expense of others. Then he dragged her by her hair and ordered her not to think about leaving the attic for a while. She remembers hearing Duke Valois' children talking behind the door, where one wondered why she was reprimanded. even though buying pens is considered a school supply that no father would hate to buy for his child. But the other explained the reason for her reprimand. The reason was that she was not his biological daughter. At that moment, Leblin realized the bitter truth, that because she was not a biological daughter, she would be hated for even the most trivial reasons, which meant she had to struggle desperately to survive. She returned to the present, realizing that she must do something to win Duke Doubled's favor, otherwise the chance of her adoption would be lost. She ran quickly toward the Duke's office. She entered in a state of panic, only to find the Duke looking at her coldly from behind his glasses. She wondered to herself why he seemed displeased. She approached the assistant and tried to hide behind him. The assistant whispered to her that the Duke was not angry with her, but with something else. Then he asked her to prepare 2 carnations next time. She suddenly realized the reason for his anger. All the money she spent in the store ultimately belonged to Doubled, and she had not bought anything for him despite squandering money. She felt panicked and thought it was no wonder he was angry. She thought about going out to buy something for him now, but she feared her action would seem like a ridiculous protest. So she decided to do something to make him happy instead. She began to search her memory for any information that might help him. She remembered the Emperor's birthday gift given by Duke Valois, and how he would boast about it. But when she saw it, she wondered why there was a stone inside a luxury jewelry box. When she approached the stone, she felt a mysterious power rising from it, and wondered what it was. It was a strange feeling, like a voice entering her consciousness without passing through her ears. The voice was asking, "What is this?" It was a voice calling her, "My child," saying it had waited for her for a long time. At that moment, the palace shook violently, and the assistant wondered if it was an earthquake. But Duke Valois realized that the matter might be a sign of a volcanic eruption, so he ordered an expedition team to be sent to Mount Robus. Leblin's memory returned to the Duke's office, where the sound of the tremor suddenly stopped, and she wondered what had happened to the light that flowed inside her, and what it was. More strangely than that, her body was moving on its own, as if it no longer belonged to her. She found herself advancing toward the gift box and grabbing the stone, which turned to dust in her hand, shocking her. The assistant and the Duke. Extreme panic seized her. The assistant wondered in amazement if this was the Noit stone. She had heard about Noit countless times during her 3 lives, as it was a vital artifact from the remains of the evil god. The assistant tried to calm the Duke, explaining that the mistake was not the child's fault, but rather that poor storage was what led to the stone breaking. But the Duke commented coldly how annoying this matter was. Leblin tried to defend herself, saying she didn't mean to do it, but the Duke interrupted her sharply, calling her a nuisance. She felt despair. Instead of winning his favor, she had caused a big problem. The Duke ordered her not to cause more trouble and to return to her room. While the assistant was leading her out of the office, she suddenly lost consciousness. The Duke is shocked when he sees her unconscious before him, and she hears the Duke's cry as he calls her, "My child." She sees Duke Amite, her merciful and righteous father whom she highly respected. She remembered she had to give up many things to live as his daughter, but it was worth it as long as he called her name and smiled at her. However, there was always a wall between her and her father. He had given her a room to stay in, taught her the duties of nobles, and ate meals with her, but he never opened his heart to her or treated her like a real daughter. Then Mina appeared, calling the Duke father. It was different with Mina. He allowed her to cling to him. He would smile a bright smile at her that he never showed her. She tried to convince herself that it was natural, for Mina is the true child of fate. Mina was a good child who brought rain during a drought and gave hope to the poor and sick, so it was natural that everyone loved her. And she believed that if she worked harder, her father would see her too. So she decided to sleep less and give more to others. But instead of appreciation, she faced the anger of Duke Valois, who called her a foolish thing and an insolent rat. He would scold her, saying she should have at least died in the street so that someone could clean up her body, calling her a useless girl. She was pleading with him not to hit her, and apologizing constantly. She wakes up from this terrible nightmare to find herself in her bed, and realizes she has fainted. Leblin sits in her bed thinking anxiously about the Noit stone and what she should do. She found that the servants of the Doubled family were truly kind, and that the Duke himself was a much better person than she had heard. But fear began to creep into her heart as she cried, wondering what would happen if these good people hated her too. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by the sound of thunder. She thought it was just thunder, but something outside caught her attention. At that moment, Leah was talking anxiously with the other maids, wondering about the child's condition after the doctor told them he didn't know the reason for her fainting. Another maid interrupted their conversation to tell Leah that she had given the child fever medicine. Leah rushed to Leblin's room to find it empty. Meanwhile, an assistant burst into the Duke's office to inform him in shock that the child had disappeared. A sharp look appeared on the Duke's face upon hearing the news. The news spread through the palace, and everyone from assistants to maids began searching for her anxiously. They searched everywhere but didn't find her in the annex or the kitchen, and the Duke began to think she might be wandering in search of bread. But the assistant told him they had already searched and didn't find her anywhere. Bad scenarios began to run through the Duke's head. Perhaps this was the work of an assassin targeting the family, or someone kidnapped her for ransom, or maybe the council elders who hate the child of fate were responsible. The sound of one of the maids screaming that she found her interrupted his thoughts. Everyone rushed to the garden to find Leblin there. Leah ran toward her with great concern. The Duke found her standing barefoot in the rain, shivering from the cold. She approached him with an innocent smile, holding a small red flower, and asked him in her childish voice if he liked flowers. Then she started crying, admitting she was wrong and pleading for him to forgive her. The Duke remembered his harsh words to her earlier, and how she hadn't meant to cause trouble. The Duke couldn't answer her. The child, pale-faced and desperately rubbing her hands, looked extremely pitiful. For the first time, he felt regret for his harshness with her. In the next scene, Leblin finds herself in a luxury bathroom, and the Duke is standing before her, so she wonders in panic what he will do to her. She believed that a single carnation was not enough to forgive her, especially since she had ruined the Noit Stone. She thought he would torture her with water, but she was surprised when he placed her feet in a tub of warm water. Then he sat before her and asked her kindly if she was in pain. She shook her head in the negative, feeling shy, but she told him that her feet hurt a little, so she noticed that he was rubbing her feet gently. She realized that his movements became smoother and gentler. While Leblin was wondering in terror what he would do to her, the Duke surprised her with his kind question about whether she was in pain, then asked her not to wander around the palace late at night. The child was stunned by his calm reaction, so she asked him in her childish voice if that was all, marveling at his lack of anger toward her. With a gentle touch on her head, the Duke smiled a faint smile she hadn't noticed before, and told her he wasn't angry. For a strange reason, Leblin felt the pain in her feet had disappeared, and that the Duke no longer frightened her as he once had. Over the next few days, caution prevailed in her actions, as she felt as if she were walking on thin ice. But the Duke never reprimanded her, nor did he show any sign of displeasure. More than that, he did not get rid of the flowers she gave him, but placed it in a vase on his desk. Leblin was puzzled by him, wondering about what he was truly thinking, and why he didn't get angry with her but kept her simple gift. This behavior was very strange for Duke Doubled, a man famous for having annihilated an entire tribe just because he was displeased. But now he was eating meals with her. Meanwhile, the maids interrupted her thoughts as they called her. Leblin turned to them in childish confusion. The maids excitedly told her she had to prepare to receive the merchants, and asked if she wanted to come with them, assuring her that there were many wonderful things that would be fun to watch. Leblin immediately realized that the Duke was buying these items to present to the Emperor as compensation for the Noit stone she broke, so she happily agreed to the idea. The maids told her the merchant's arrival would take some time, and suggested she go to the library in the meantime, which seemed like a great idea. Leblin agreed very enthusiastically. When she arrived, she was awestruck by the size and beauty of the library, so Sishu asked her to choose a book. The maids began showing different books to her. Ringda presented a book on social life hacks titled 101 Ways to Scam, while Dahlia presented a book titled Beat Everyone Who Deserves to be Beaten to Death, insisting that this was the truly good book. Sishu criticized this violent choice and chose a book about moneylenders for her. But the maids entered into a chaotic argument about books inappropriate for children between illegal scamming and violence. Leblin was still pretending she couldn't read yet, so she decided to choose a book with a beautiful-looking cover. While she was wandering between the shelves, a strange book without a title caught her eye. She noticed its condition looked old and different and wondered about the existence of such a book in the library. She opened the book to find texts written in an ancient language inside, but she was able to understand its content, which talked about the greatest achievement of the founding emperor, Fred Dwyer, which was the defeat of Ivan, one of the followers of the evil god. According to Ivan's records, there were 2 necessary conditions for manifestation of the evil god's powers. The first condition is contact with a holy relic, which is considered the key to awakening the latent power. The second condition is obtaining a medium, which allows for the use of that power. Leblin wondered to herself about the truth of this book. While she was thinking about these 2 conditions, she felt a bad feeling. She wondered why the matter had to be linked to the evil god. The book explained that the guardian god of the empire, the righteous, Nereid, was the one who sealed the evil god, the origin of all evils, in order to protect humanity. However, over time, that seal began to weaken gradually. Painful memories returned to Leblin as she read, as she remembered that to reseal the evil god, the power of Mina, the true child of fate, was required, and that she was the one presented as a sacrifice in those sealing rituals. The rituals were so painful that she wished they would kill her quickly to end her agony. One of the maids interrupted her dark thoughts by asking anxiously about her condition, so Leblin quickly composed herself, claiming with childish innocence that the lion in the story was scary. The trick worked on the maids, who found her behavior very cute, and they began pampering her, considering that their child was afraid of the evil lion's roar. Despite the difficult situation, Leblin felt relieved because the matter wasn't so bad. She continued her pretense of fear, and at that moment, Leah approached her. Leblin's features changed immediately, and she asked with childish enthusiasm and joy if the merchants had arrived. Leah answered in the affirmative and asked her if she would like to take a look, so Leblin screamed with great happiness. Leblin found herself in the majestic reception hall of the Doubled family, and was awestruck by the luxury of the place. A huge tapestry hanging caught her attention, so she realized it must be the tapestry of the founding emperor, and as she had heard, it was written in an ancient language. She remembered that this tapestry was obtained by Duke Doubled after his conquest of the Land of Ice. The imperial palace itself coveted it, but they were unable to wrench it from the hands of the Doubled family. Thus, the tapestry became a symbol of the family's military power. Nobles who admired it imitated it and decorated their halls with tapestries, though most of them ended up just imitating the idea. While she was admiring the place, the merchant Turba and his men entered and paid their respects to the Duke. Panic struck Leblin, and she wondered in terror why he was here. Turba stepped forward, expressing his great honor at being summoned, so Leblin remembered he was a self-made figure. One of the Duke's assistants told him they needed a piece to replace the Noit stone, so Turba responded confidently that there is no one who deals with pieces comparable to Noit better than him. But Leblin knew his truth. He started as a slave in a collapsed nation, then became a merchant sought by top nobles. But in truth, he was a con artist who sold fake paintings to the imperial family. The matter caused a huge stir when it was later revealed that he had committed many scams even before that. Leah noticed her anxious looks, while Leblin wondered anxiously if he was planning to deceive the Doubled family as well. Turba recommended an artifact, and when asked about it, he revealed a stone tablet engraved with ancient writing. He explained that this stone tablet had a prophecy descend upon it in ancient times. One of the Duke's followers commented that a tablet bearing a divine prophecy would be treated as a holy relic, which is better than an artifact of an evil god. Another suggested that it would be a perfect gift for the Duke's coming-of-age celebration. The Duke asked him if he was sure it was a tablet upon which a prophecy descended, so Turba confirmed that there are records of a similar piece in historical texts, and that it has been verified to contain strong divine power. The followers were convinced that if it had undergone verification by the temple, and if it was from Turba's trading company, it could be trusted. Turba added with a dramatic touch that he discovered it personally on an ancient plateau, and that he did not give up despite attacks from hordes of monsters. Turba continued his talk, claiming he couldn't give up the stone tablet because he felt it would help someone someday. The Duke's followers were moved by his story, commenting that he had been through many hardships. But the Duke interrupted their talk, asking him to put the matter aside and mention the price. So Turba told him he would offer it for 100 million francs. The Duke's followers were stunned. This was a huge amount, such that it is usually used in national budgets. One of them pointed out that no matter how rich the Doubled family is, this is not an amount that can be spent lightly. But in the end, it is the only piece that can replace Noit. Leblin was shocked by this talk, while the Duke's followers were consulting anxiously, and Turba was looking at them with a sly confidence. Leblin decided to reveal his truth. Suddenly, Turba saw her and welcomed her enthusiastically as the child of fate, inviting her to come closer and take a look. Leblin stepped toward the stone tablet, while an assistant tried to stop her for fear it might be damaged. But she sat before it, dazzled by its outward beauty. Turba asked her if she felt the power of the gods, while one of the followers warned her not to break it. Then Turba added with a cunning suggestion that since she is the child of fate, perhaps she can read the ancient language. An assistant mocked him, wondering how a child who doesn't speak the language of the empire yet can interpret an ancient text. So Turba had to claim he was joking. But Leblin surprised everyone when she began reading the inscription in her childish voice, saying that Notu worked hard all his life for his family, and that he rests here in peace. Shock struck Turba and the followers alike. Then she pointed her finger at him, wondering if he was stupid, for everything is written here clearly, and described him as a con artist, and that this tablet is nothing but a tombstone. One of the followers wondered in confusion about how she read the stone's contents. Leblin knew that the ancient language was difficult to read even for senior members of the temple, because only a few characters had been deciphered, but she also knew that 10 years from now, a living interpretation of the ancient language would appear, although very few would be able to read it even after that because of its complete difference from modern writing. She knew that by the time of her death, there would be only 3 people who had learned the ancient language. They were the future crown prince, Adrian Luerg, and the eldest son of Duke Doubled, Johann Doubled, and herself. Therefore, Turba's claim that he had extracted it from the ancient heights was a lie from the beginning, for the Calicis cemetery was located in the exact opposite direction of the ancient heights. One of the followers asked in shock if this was really what was written, and that she can read the ancient language, and that this is not a prophecy tablet, but a tombstone. So Leblin answered in the affirmative with an innocent smile, while Turba screamed that this was impossible. Turba's words stunned one of the Duke's followers, so he asked Leblin if what she said was true. The child answered with childish confidence that she could do it. One of the followers leaned toward her and asked her how she learned that, for Leblin had prepared an answer to this expected question. She answered innocently that the words simply appear to her, taking advantage of the fact that she is still a child of 4 years old. The trick worked on the followers who found it cute, and they concluded that the text might read itself, and that it is unthinkable that a child of this age would lie. This was the answer Mina had used in the past too, for when she was asked how she read ancient texts, she would simply answer that they appeared to her, without knowing why. Everyone believed her then, considering it proof that she was the true child of fate who carries the power of the gods. Through that experience, Leblin learned how to exploit the title Child of Fate, especially since she still technically holds it. Turba interrupted the scene with an angry scream, calling her a liar. He claimed he had proof of the truth of his words, and that the temple would verify that. Then he mockingly wondered how she would prove that she can read the ancient language, considering this the real problem. But Leblin replied coldly, accusing him of making the whole thing up, while the followers were whispering in confusion. Turba continued his challenge, saying that the only person who could write the ancient language was the founding emperor. So how could a child like her do that? But Leblin knew that her situation was completely different from Mina's, as she is a child of fate being questioned. So she stepped toward the founding emperor's tapestry and began reading the ancient inscription on it in her childish voice, saying, "Blessing upon the one who carries the message." Then she continued reading the founding emperor's full name, Fred Anasis Semin Kaliard. Shock struck the Duke himself, for this was the true name of the founding emperor. The followers were stunned, wondering if this was his true name, and that his middle name is Semin. The Semin tribe was a people said to have been created by the evil god. It is a tribe the mere mention of which has become taboo now. If it were known that the founding emperor had been born from a cursed tribe, it would have been catastrophic. Therefore, the imperial family chose to hide his origins and erased his middle name from all records. For this reason, no one knew his true name except for a very few people, mainly the imperial family and a few high-ranking nobles, such as Duke Doubled. With a bright smile, Leblin explained that her reading of his true name is conclusive proof that she read the truth. The followers had no choice but to believe her, wondering if she was truly the child of fate. One of the assistants commented that he thought she was just smart, but this matter goes much beyond that. Then another follower pointed angrily to the fact that this means Turba had deceived them. Turba collapsed from fear, claiming he had risen to this position in the name of the gods. But the Duke replied with a sarcastic coldness, commenting on the absurdity of the situation, where he demands proof from a child while invoking the gods when faced with a question he cannot answer. Panic seized Turba as he stammered. Leblin looked at him with feigned sympathy, fully aware of his feelings, and whispered for him to run, noting that the Duke had been indifferent to her lately and might already suspect something. At that moment, the Duke remarked that it seemed he had been too lenient recently, to the point where even insects were trying to crawl upwards. He then ordered one of his aides, North, to take this so-called chosen of the gods to the dungeon. As he was leaving, the Duke ordered him to bring a clear answer regarding that stone tablet, even if he had to rip open his stomach to see if there was any divine will inside. North agreed. Turba tried to protest, but he soon collapsed and confessed everything even before the investigation began, begging the Duke for mercy and admitting he had committed a mortal sin. He confessed that he had deceived them because he needed money. He had to obtain a certain holy artifact to deal with the Pope, and its price was astronomical, which drove him to seek funds by any means. Leblin wondered what kind of artifact could drive him to such reckless fraud. That thing was Étoile, the artifact that allowed Mina to possess immense power, and which in itself is considered proof that its bearer is the child of fate. But Leblin noticed its color was different from Mina's Étoile. Mina's was platinum, while this one was gold, and even the jewel at its tip looked different. Leblin realized in shock that this was not the Étoile kept by the temple. A cunning smile appeared on the Duke's face. A second étoile had appeared. North immediately understood why Turba had gone mad. The étoile was the sacred symbol of the Nereid religion, and he wondered about its current location. North informed him it was at the bottom of the sea, but there was a problem. It did not lie within imperial waters. Rather, it had crossed into the territorial waters of a foreign continent by exactly 10 meters. The Duke understood that this was why the sect could not move directly. Nereid, being the state religion of the empire, could not intervene there, as it would spark a war. Leblin realized that Turba planned to trade the étoile with a foreign king, explaining his need for such a huge sum. The Duke confirmed they must secure an artifact like the étoile, so North asked if he would negotiate with the foreign king. But the Duke replied mockingly, wondering why they would go through all that trouble when they could simply start a war. The assistant responded enthusiastically that he would prepare immediately. Leblin was impressed by this stunning solution and decided never to mess with them again. North thanked Leblin, considering all of this to be thanks to her. The child was puzzled by his words, so he explained that they found the second étoile as a result of the collapse of Nuit. Leblin wondered if it was truly worth all this effort. She also wondered if the Duke felt the same way, so she decided to test it. Leblin grabbed the edge of the Duke's clothes and asked him with childish enthusiasm to carry her. She looked at him with wide eyes and promised she would be a good girl. She added to herself that she could grow up well on her own without being a burden to anyone. North and the Duke looked on, moved by her words. Then she gathered her courage and asked him to be her father. The Duke carried her in his arms. He asked her quietly if he was supposed to carry her like this. Leblin felt immense joy, although he did not explicitly agree to be her father. This was enough for her for now. More importantly, he was smiling at her, making her feel that he did not see her as a nuisance. Later, Leblin achieved another small feat. She managed to put on her socks by herself for the first time. Leah congratulated her warmly, commenting on how much she had grown. The other maids praised her intelligence, considering her a true genius. Driven by her achievement, LeBlaine determinedly announced that she wanted to go see the Duke. The maids rejoiced, considering that the decisive moment had finally arrived. Leah encouraged her to go and show the master of the castle what she could do. LeBlaine entered the Duke's office while he was busy writing, and an aide informed him of her arrival. She stepped forward enthusiastically and proudly told him she could wear socks now. The Duke looked at her with a light smile and asked if that was true. LeBlaine felt confident. It seemed the Duke no longer hated her as before, and he had even embraced her last time. She realized that if she played her cards right, she might be able to finalize this adoption deal. She had to prove she wasn't a child who always needed help. This was like a job interview for her. The maids encouraged her enthusiastically from a distance. She began explaining LeBlaine's guide to wearing socks, outlining the steps. First, stretching the sock opening with fingers, and second, aligning the toes straight. But at the third step, which required using all her strength to pull the sock up at once, the attempt failed. However, the followers found it extremely cute, considering it didn't matter if she couldn't wear them. As she was so adorable, it didn't matter. She tried again and failed, causing the followers to stifle their laughter. LeBlaine felt she looked pathetic, but Leah interrupted, confirming she had succeeded moments ago and that she had seen it herself. The Duke interrupted her failed attempt, strictly stating that he could not tolerate anyone living in his castle if they showed no improvement. LeBlaine trembled and replied that she heard him clearly, for she knew the Duke was strict even with his sons. His second and youngest sons were already enrolled in the elite academy for geniuses in the capital, and even his eldest son was studying at a foreign boarding school on the other side of the world. If he sent his sons at such a young age to study, he would not be lenient with her. But he surprised her with a smile, asking her to practice while he was away to inspect the region. LeBlaine agreed enthusiastically, promising to be daddy's girl and do her best. This scene sparked jealousy among the followers, so one of them asked if she really loved the Duke that much. She nodded her head, thinking to herself that he was the person who might adopt her. The followers commented that this feeling must be wonderful, but the Duke replied in the negative. LeBlaine was surprised by his blunt response. Thus, the Duke left the next day to inspect the region. While LeBlaine was walking in the corridor, she was thinking that the Duke said he would return within 20 days. All she needed was a quiet place to practice wearing socks on her own. But suddenly she heard strange noises and wondered what was happening. It was a priest from the sect crossing the castle gates without the Duke's permission, claiming he came to take the little miss with him. A guard protested that this was a matter that could wait until the Duke's return, but the priest explained that the Pope was the official and legal guardian of the little miss at the moment, and that a guardian does not need the landowner's permission to retrieve his child. LeBlaine realized in horror that they were going to take her, and that if they took her, they would send her to Duke Valois. She began to recall the memories in which Duke Valois tortured her. The Doubled family, despite its short history, had achieved immense prosperity thanks to its unique educational style. They were born dipped in the blood of their relatives and raised to be slaughterers. Theodore Doubled was the closest thing to a perfect head the family had ever produced. He possessed immense magical power, a perfectly balanced physical build, and a sharp sense that doubled the family's wealth within a few years of him taking over its leadership. In addition to his cruel ability to exclude emotions entirely, he embodied the doubled ideal of the perfect form. Meanwhile, at the regional inspection office, the men were eating their food anxiously, with one of them commenting that he didn't know if the food was going down his throat or his nose. The atmosphere was extremely tense. Someone felt the presence of magic, noting that possession of magical tools not intended for protection was prohibited. The other man tried to defend himself, claiming the tool was for communication and that he was asked to buy fabric for the child. A guard angrily asked why buying fabric required a magical communication tool. He added that he would need to inspect it and demanded he hand it over, which increased the man's confusion. Meanwhile, LeBlaine was practicing calling out to the Duke elsewhere, trying to pronounce his name correctly. She was worried that if she couldn't pronounce his name correctly, he might end up hating her. But the men watching her found it extremely cute, and one of them commented that he got the magical tool as payment for buying the fabric. Through the tool, one of the Duke's aides was watching the scene, wondering why she liked his master so much, while the Duke himself was watching her, commenting that she was an eccentric child. Meanwhile, one of the followers was happily commenting on how cute humans were, but the Duke did not share the same feeling. Rather, he looked grim. He saw that she was not cute, had never thought anyone was cute, and didn't even know what that feeling was supposed to be. To him, she looked like a crushed human, but she caught his attention because she moved somehow. He kept looking at her because the mole on her face looked funny. Every time she looked up, her skin stretched and the mole got bigger, which was strange. The followers felt their master was displeased. They felt fear, showing symptoms such as trembling pupils and narrowing blood vessels from fright. One of them tried to change the subject, saying things had been turbulent lately, with sweat pouring off him profusely. The Duke asked what happened. He told him there were bandits wreaking havoc outside the borders of the region, and that the awkward situation was forgotten. But the Duke replied coldly that this was not his region, so there was no need to worry about it. The man agreed with him, but added that he mentioned it because of frequent cases of child kidnapping. The Duke imagined LeBlaine being kidnapped and screaming for his help. He then remarked that he could not let people run wild near his region. He ordered his men to take care of the matter, and one of them asked how far they should clean up. The Duke ordered him to deal with the matter up to the borders of the Roxel region, as there was no need to deal with someone else's land. Then he thought that the Roxel region had a beautiful flower garden, and noble ladies often went there on picnics. He imagined LeBlaine as an elegant young lady telling him she was leaving, then being kidnapped. He concluded it wasn't bad to gain favor with the neighbors and ordered his men to clean the Roxel region as well. Then he thought that when she grew up, she might want to ride horses, and there was a good plane for riding behind the Roxel region. He imagined her again telling him she was leaving to ride horses, then being kidnapped. He changed his mind again and decided to clean the plains too. Then he thought there was a good river for swimming behind the plains. The Duke's fantasies continued, imagining she might want to go swimming too, and so he continued to expand the scope of cleaning until he ordered them to clear everything down to the Norgus River, a distance spanning hundreds of kilometers. His men were stunned. They understood this meant the total extermination of everyone in those areas. Thus, the knights who had misspoken ended up exterminating the bandits to the last man. Meanwhile, Leah found LeBlaine looking for something and asked her what she was doing. LeBlaine was looking for the bag gifted to her by Grandpa, one of the old followers. Leah reassured her she had the bag and asked why she was looking for it. LeBlaine hesitated to answer and seemed secretive. Then she apologized to Leah, saying she couldn't tell her, which increased the maid's confusion. LeBlaine believed this was something she had to do alone. If the temple priests came to take her, they would send her to Duke Valois' house, and then there would be no escape. She had to run away now. She knew that if the sect ordered her taken, the Empress Dowager would side with them, and that there was no way the Duke would keep her and turn both the sect and the imperial family into enemies, especially since he was away on an inspection tour and wouldn't return for 2 weeks. The sect would send her to Valois, where surveillance was tight, and she wouldn't be able to escape. So, she had to escape while being transferred to the capital. She slipped into the kitchen, where one of the maids greeted her warmly. She asked her for water and plenty of it. The maids responded happily to her request. Then she asked her to give her the bag as well, and thus, she secured the water for her journey. She had already secured the food by hiding snacks in advance. Then she remembered something important. Since she reverted to a child's mentality when tired or sleepy, sweets were essential. She began stuffing her bag with candy, realizing 1 or 2 pieces wouldn't be enough, but she soon felt frustrated, as the bag was very small and had filled up after only 30 pieces of candy. She still needed to pack a map, clothes, and shoes. Then she decided to pack the most important thing. It was money. She had hidden the allowance she received from the followers. While she was clutching her bundle of money, Leah surprised her by asking what kind of mischief she was planning. LeBlaine denied it, claiming she had only packed her bag. But Leah, who completely misunderstood the situation, told her sadly that she must be sent away, considering it an opportunity for her to grow up in a better environment and get the love of parents, assuring her that everyone would love her for being a kind person. But LeBlaine answered her with tears in her eyes that people do not love her, and that she would rather fall into a sewer than go there. LeBlaine knew she couldn't ask Leah for help. Leah was just a maid, and if she asked for her help, only Leah's life would be in danger. Leah offered her some snacks, and LeBlaine agreed in a low voice. Outside, the maids had prepared a nice tea session for her and told her they would read her a fairy tale today. The maids tried to comfort her. One offered her to enjoy the snacks and fairy tales, while another said they should say goodbye to their child properly. But they couldn't help themselves and began to cry bitterly, embracing each other. LeBlaine noticed that their sadness over her departure had been accumulating for a long time. They remembered she was carrying her when she gave them snacks, that the snacks were delicious, and that horse riding was fun too. LeBlaine began to remember the happy times she spent in the Duke's palace and felt very sad. Compared to her previous life, this place was like heaven. Suddenly, the maids noticed she was crying, so they asked her why and vowed to severely punish whoever made her cry. LeBlaine thought that once she left, she would never see Leah again, and that if the Duke were here, she would at least have hope that she wouldn't have to go. She burst into tears, screaming that she wanted to see the Duke, never imagining she would miss that cold man. The maids embraced her to comfort her, but no matter how much she cried, nothing changed. Finally, the day of the priest's arrival came. One of the Duke's followers wondered why they had come so suddenly, and the priest replied that this was by order of His Holiness the Pope. Meanwhile, the maids were preparing LeBlaine's things, offering for her to eat later, and suggesting putting a blanket with her so she wouldn't feel cold on the way. The priest approached her with a smirk and asked how she was. He asked her how difficult it was for her in a place where she had no ties or family. She replied it wasn't difficult, but he reassured her that she no longer had to worry, as they had found someone who would raise her with love. He told her that Duke Valois would become a kind father to her and would surely raise her with love. LeBlaine mocked the idea of being raised with love in her heart, for that scoundrel had raised her with a cane. She knew that the sect did not choose Valois for her sake. Rather, they simply chose a cooperative family that would be easy to exploit when she awakened her power as the child of fate. If she went to Valois like this, there would be no escape. The priest tried to drag her, but she resisted, screaming that it was painful. Leah tried to intervene, but the priest grabbed LeBlaine's hand violently, threatening her that she would be cursed by God if she threw such a tantrum. He added that bad children are punished with the cane, and that if she had received the Lord's grace, she should at least show some effort and be grateful for being adopted by a prestigious family like Valois. Horrific memories of the past returned. The smell of alcohol, the sound of a leather belt being dragged on the floor, and the sound of the leather cutting through the air. She couldn't breathe as she relived those memories. The priest grabbed her face, wondering what she was doing, but a powerful voice interrupted him, ordering him to take his hands off his daughter. It was Duke Doubled who intervened. He had returned from his inspection tour. The Duke repeated his order to the priest to take his hands off his daughter. The priest tried to justify the situation, saying the child had already been agreed to be entrusted to Valois, but the Duke replied coldly that they would have to discuss the matter again. The priest protested that this was ridiculous, and the knights prepared for battle, but the Duke silenced him with a definitive tone, reminding him that he had not given him permission to speak. LeBlaine looks at the Duke with tears filling her eyes. The Duke noticed the mark left by the priest's hand on LeBlaine's wrist. He grabbed the priest's hand firmly, then ordered him to deliver a message that this child, from this day forward, would be under Doubled's care. The priest screamed in pain. The Duke carried LeBlaine in his arms, warning the priest that if he wished to discuss this child's matter in the future, he had better bring the Holy Temple Knights with him at the very least. The Duke remarked that she looked ugly, which surprised her. He explained that she should at least wash her face to look decent. He then ordered his men to clean up the mess. North asked the priest to leave since the matter had been settled, but the priest seemed shocked, so North kicked him out. One of the aides reached out his hand toward LeBlaine, inviting her to come to him, but she, unexpectedly, hugged the Duke tightly, for his embrace was the only place she felt safe. Going anywhere else was terrifying. Leah told the Duke that the child was terrified and that she wasn't usually like this, and pleaded with him to allow them to stay with her for a few hours. The Duke calmly agreed. Leah and the aide were struck with shock. LeBlaine felt embarrassed and apologized to the Duke, but he remarked that this little one loves him very much. Then he asked them if this was true. The aide and Leah had no choice but to agree confusedly, then left quickly. LeBlaine rejoiced in her heart. He had said she was his daughter. She asked hesitantly if she could stay here. She promised him she would be good, wouldn't even wear shoes, and would eat only a little, but the Duke interrupted her, assuring her that she would stay here. Then he added with a smile that he would adopt her. LeBlaine was surprised by the Duke's reaction, for he had always worn that emotionless expression. But this time, she felt that his touch was strangely warm and gentle. The Duke patted her head gently and told her she could sleep now. The next day, LeBlaine was enthusiastically asking one of the aides to write something for her. Thus, she finally obtained her official adoption document bearing the name LeBlaine Doubled. She was overwhelmed with happiness and danced for joy. The Duke was truly an amazing person. He broke a priest's arm and nothing happened. The Emperor himself mediated with the temple, and most likely bribed them. LeBlaine felt immense joy. She could grow up here for only 5 years, and once she reached 10, she would be better able to control her adult thinking. Then, she wouldn't act like a child even if she were hungry or sleepy, and she could leave. While she was planning her future, having decided to behave well and save some money to travel later, she heard the maids talking about the arrival of the 2 young masters soon, and that the carriage had already entered the castle. While one of the maids was helping LeBlaine get dressed, one of the buttons was about to fall off. LeBlaine asked her to give her the button. The maids rejoiced, and Ringda offered to give her heart along with it, but Leah stopped her for fear she would swallow it by mistake. LeBlaine felt disappointed. This button was supposed to represent part of her travel money. The maids immediately removed the buttons from their clothes, and Dahlia made a necklace out of them. Dahlia told Leah that the lady wouldn't be able to eat it now. Leah agreed. LeBlaine rejoiced. If she sold high-quality buttons like these, they would fetch her a lot of money. From a distance, the maids were watching the arrival of Duke Terramore with members of the Senate, wondering about the reason for their visit this time. LeBlaine wondered about Terramore's identity and felt afraid when she saw him. Leah ordered the curtains to be closed so they wouldn't glimpse her, for fear the Senate might decide to subject her to bloodline education as they had done with the young lords. Additionally, his eyes struck terror into her soul. Leah asked her if they would go to eat. LeBlaine was surprised that they didn't eat here. She explained that meals are usually taken in the rooms, and that the Duke is always busy and settles for a quick meal in his office. LeBlaine wondered why, and told herself she would find out when they went. But LeBlaine felt she had seen that old man somewhere before and wondered where. When she entered the dining room, she gave an enthusiastic greeting, but she was surprised by the presence of 2 other people at the table. They were the Duke's sons. The Duke called her by her name, then carried her and placed her on his lap. The Duke introduced her to his 2 sons, Henry and Isaac. LeBlaine noticed they possessed the same silver hair and blue eyes, but their temperaments were completely opposite. But one thing was certain, they were miniature versions of the Duke. She had heard that the eldest son was studying at an external academy, so she concluded he hadn't come. Then the Duke introduced her to them, saying, "And this is LeBlaine." Henry welcomed her with a warm smile, saying he looked forward to working with her. As for Isaac, he seemed large for his age. LeBlaine felt jealous. She was growing slowly. Additionally, these 2 had climbed to the top of the pyramid without relying on family support. The second son, Henry, became a talent controlling the empire's money flow at a young age, and for this achievement became the head of a branch of the family in his early 20s. LeBlanc remembered that Duke Amity did not like him, describing him as a fox who fattens himself by circumventing the law. As for the third son, Isaac, he possessed an extraordinary talent in martial arts and would in the future become one of the 4 knights representing the empire. She remembered how Duke Valois spoke of him with disdain, describing him as a violent bully. These distinguished young lords would later be called Mina's knights, Mina's brothers, or Mina's guardians, for they were like siblings to her. For this reason, when she was accused of trying to kill Mina, she was extremely grateful that she never collided with them, for they would have torn her to pieces if they had seen her. Even until the moment of her death, whenever the name of doubled sons was mentioned, her heart would shrink in her chest. But she tried to calm herself. They are not Mina's knights now. All she had to do was make sure not to act annoyingly, and she wouldn't have to tremble as before. She decided to leave a good impression. They are the young masters of the house, so she greeted them with an innocent smile. Henry smiled, so she felt relieved. Perhaps they could get along after all, but she noticed they were completely different from how they were in the dining hall. Isaac scowled at her as soon as he entered the room, and Henry was cold and distant. Suddenly, Isaac asked her in a sharp tone if she knew how to eat carrots. She replied in the affirmative, confused. He shouted at her, wondering if she was a rabbit. LeBlanc believed Isaac had just called her a fool, and wondered what Henry was doing as he continued writing something on a piece of paper. She approached him and found that he was writing things difficult to understand, even though she had lived much longer than him. He asked if she had something to say. She told him she wanted to see the map. Isaac accused his brother of trying to embezzle money again, but Henry corrected him, saying the correct term was making a fortune. LeBlanc wondered to herself how a child could know about large sums of money. Henry explained that internal and external affairs were gradually becoming unstable, and at times like these, iron must be bought. But Isaac interrupted him enthusiastically, saying he knew the answer. When war breaks out, the price of iron used in making weapons rises. Henry considered this an immature answer. Isaac protested that it was correct, but Henry explained to him that this was the way merchants thought. When war breaks out, nobles are forced to donate iron to the state, so gold is better at such times, as currency loses its value during war. LeBlanc felt as if she had entered a strange world, children knowing such matters. No wonder they didn't react much when she mentioned the unannounced tax audit. Isaac interrupted her thoughts by shouting in her face. He threatened her that he would kill her if she looked at him with disdain for not knowing about gold. LeBlanc denied it, reminding him that he knew about iron too. Isaac smiled and warned her against vanity just because she was the child of fate, as he was a strong child too. Henry looked at him with disdain. Henry commented coldly that war shows no mercy or emotion, and this is the doubled way. Doubled shows no mercy even to blood relatives, neither parents nor children, so someone not related to them by blood would be in greater danger. LeBlanc didn't understand a word of what they were saying. She had eaten little because she felt uncomfortable eating on the Duke's lap, but she heard Henry muttering that he hoped their greed wouldn't shorten their lives. Despite her confusion, she realized she had to answer, for children who answer well are loved. So she answered him in the affirmative, enthusiastically. The brothers were surprised by her reaction. Isaac burst into laughter. As she was leaving, Henry wondered about this child. Is she faking innocence, or is there more than meets the eye? He doesn't believe that children are innocent just because they are small. His younger brother is a genius who learned to read at 3. Although he considers him a fool by his standards, even that fool can think. The Academy of the Gifted is full of children his age who look like snakes. Henry imagined LeBlanc playing chess cleverly. A child who reported the family about the Pope's and Temple's affairs could not be entirely ignorant. Additionally, she speaks of the child of fate and how she acts cutely. One of his followers had told him she had already taken over the Duke's lap as if it were her own place, and that his position as a young lord would be in danger if she were adopted. He decided he would have to watch her. Meanwhile, Isaac was hitting the desk angrily, so Henry asked him what he was doing. Isaac denied that she was cute at all, but Henry accused him of having already fallen in love with her, which Isaac strongly denied. But in reality, he didn't think she was cute. He just wanted to poke her plump cheeks once. LeBlanc tried to scream, but she couldn't do it properly, which frustrated her. Isaac was determined not to be fooled by her cute, adult-like behavior and decided within himself to torment her. Later, she found herself in a direct confrontation with him and wondered in confusion why he was acting this way. Silence and hesitation filled the place, and LeBlanc felt she had to do something to break this awkward situation. So she gathered her courage and offered him her money pouch in an attempt to break the ice. But he completely misunderstood her and angrily warned her not to covet a position that wasn't hers, threatening her. Henry was watching the situation from afar, wondering what that child was doing. Henry realized that Isaac was making a fatal mistake. For the moment he threatened her, he would inevitably be the loser. Suddenly, Isaac summoned a piece of bread, announcing that he was going to do something very scary, which was that he would eat all this bread himself in front of her. Henry looked at them with disdain, wondering to himself if they were fools. LeBlanc reacted dramatically to the situation, accusing him of brutality because he would eat all the bread himself and not share it with her. But in reality, she was thinking that if he got hungry while watching her eat, she might not think like an adult and might pull his hair. And if she did that, she would definitely be kicked out. She decided not to be greedy, and Isaac surprised her by praising her, considering her a good girl, but she kindly asked him to give her some of the bread. He asked in surprise if she wanted some from him, and she nodded her head in confirmation. So he replied that he couldn't resist and would give her half of it. Happiness overwhelmed LaBlaine as she tasted the bread, for it tasted exceptionally sweet and delicious, to the point that she felt like dancing. Isaac was watching her enjoy the food, and when he tasted it too, he found that it tasted very good, especially since he had chosen it randomly. At that moment, Leah entered, which caused LaBlaine to panic. She remembered that Leah had promised her strawberries today and told her not to eat any snacks. In an attempt to justify the situation, she cast the blame on Isaac, claiming he was the one who gave it to her. Isaac was surprised and confused, but he admitted that he was the one who gave it to her. Leah smiled and said she would overlook the matter since they ate together nicely, and LaBlaine felt a great sense of relief. Then Leah told her she had come to take her as it was time for her nap. LaBlaine waved goodbye to Isaac as she left. Isaac remained in his place, trying to convince himself that she wasn't cute at all. While Leah was putting her on her bed, she remarked that they seemed very happy together in the dining hall. Leah told LaBlaine that she knew the young lords would love her, for how could they not when she was this kind? But LaBlaine thought to herself that it wasn't the case, for Henry and Isaac didn't love her. Nevertheless, she couldn't sit idly by, for she had to live here until she could seek asylum. So she determined that if she saw them often, they would eventually get used to her. She decided to win them over. The next morning, she wondered if Henry and Isaac would be at lunch today, but she knew they were very busy people. They were constantly training and attending endless meetings, so she found no opportunity to talk to them alone. Thus, today's lunch was her only chance. She decided to ask them to play with her immediately after eating, spontaneously. She sneaked into the dining room like a secret agent and found that they were all gathered at the same time. North noticed her and asked if she was the little miss. LaBlaine felt nervous and wondered how she should enter. North welcomed her, saying she must have come because she missed his master, but she denied that to herself. The Duke invited her to come to him, so she responded happily and sat on his lap. The servants were astonished by this scene, for the rumors were true. She was sitting on the Duke's lap quite naturally. They praised her kindness and that she wasn't a picky eater, but rather enjoyed peppers and carrots, which she actually hated, and one of them began to boast about how polite she was. LaBlaine greeted the attendees, and they burst into laughter, which made her feel embarrassed. But her targets today, Henry and Isaac, were looking at the aides in bewilderment. She felt that things were not going as planned. At that moment, an old man entered, apologizing for being late. LaBlaine recognized him immediately. He was the man she saw last time. He was sitting near the Duke, so she wondered if he was a high-ranking follower and felt that she had seen him somewhere. Suddenly, she remembered that he might be the witness the Duke had personally hidden. This man had brought danger upon himself and had mistreated a child right under the Guardian's nose. So it was no wonder that child grew up to hunt him down. He was an abuser. LaBlaine had heard the servants talking and thought that Count Terramore had no children, so she wondered in confusion who exactly he had mistreated. The only children within Terramore's reach were Henry and Isaac, and a future power strong enough to force one of Doubled's elders into hiding. But she dismissed the idea, for it would be crazy to mistreat a son of Doubled. That was common sense. But crazy things happen all the time. She remembered a conversation she heard in her previous life, where Duke Amity's wife wondered in shock if the Count's daughter had been beaten by her teacher. The Duke confirmed to her that was what they said, and that it was a terrible thing. The Duchess said that happened in her old world too. Nannies mistreating the children they care for, and kindergarten teachers hitting children in front of the class. So, LaBlaine wasn't 100% sure that Terramore wasn't that kind of psychopath. And if he had mistreated one of them, which one was it? For Duke Amity's Butler made it sound as if there was only one victim. She thought that Henry was smart and wouldn't be an easy target. As for Isaac, he seemed aggressive. So did he truly endure abuse until he grew up? North interrupted her thoughts by asking if she didn't like the food, and she quickly denied it. Although she was jumping to conclusions, she felt the need to verify the matter. Then she asked North to take her to the training ground, and there she found the brothers training. The instructor asked North what he was doing there, and North told him that LaBlaine wanted to see the training ground, so the instructor told him he had a report to submit anyway. The brothers were surprised to see her, and Isaac asked what she was doing there, and she told him she wanted to play with them. He replied mockingly, asking if she had come all this way just to see him. What a pain. But she was carefully examining his body and found no bruises or scars on his neck, ankles, or under his sleeves. She couldn't tell if the slight bruises were from training or beating. She noticed that Henry had scratches too and might have been injured during training. She decided to move closer for a thorough look, but she suddenly tripped. Henry caught her before she fell. She thanked him, and he replied for her not to mind it. Even though he was smiling, his eyes were telling her to stay away. Nevertheless, she didn't think he was a bad boy. He was cold, but not overly hostile. Isaac interrupted the scene, saying she couldn't even walk properly, calling her a fool as he hit the ground hard. LaBlaine knew this feeling, and knew how terrifying an adult's hand could be. At that moment, Terramore appeared, remarking that the three of them were together. He approached LeBlanc, saying that children's hands were truly soft. Then, he told her that she was quite obedient and that if she stayed that way, there would be no need for punishment. LeBlanc realized that this was the same person she saw in her first life. She remembered how he was screaming, wondering why they wouldn't send him out of the country, and how he was afraid that man would kill him if he remained silent. She also remembered how Duke Amity told him that the responsibility lay on him because he had mistreated a child, and he offered him help in escaping, and he did so. Terramore was the same person. He was helping with the young lord's studies. And when he tried to take them to study, LeBlanc screamed in her mind that this wouldn't happen, and she screamed out loud in objection. North took notice of her screaming and moved quickly toward her, but LeBlanc cleverly wondered why he thought she brought the assistant North to the training ground. It was because he was the Duke's closest assistant, the person who could stand up to those in high positions. Terramore claimed he had some free time, so he came to greet his wonderful students. But in reality, he was planning something else, remarking that it was better to postpone greetings for another time. Then he left the place. One of the assistants remarked that Terramore would take over the education of the young lords again this time, and that this must be the influence of the Council of Elders. While the assistants were talking, LeBlanc was thinking that she must now find the child Terramore had mistreated. She realized there was no need to search, for fear always shows itself. It was Henry, and on the training ground, the match resumed. LeBlanc wondered what she should do now. She thought about telling the Duke, but she had no evidence. He could simply claim that any bruises or wounds occurred during training, and if she spoke without evidence, she would seem like the strange one. It was better for Henry to say it himself, but the fact that he hadn't spoken until now meant he was hiding it. She wondered why someone as smart as Henry would hide something like this. Suddenly, she noticed something strange. Isaac was using aura, an aura used only by the elite even among the Holy Temple Knights. To use an aura at this age, his opponent immediately surrendered, but Isaac replied coldly that there was no such thing as surrender. If you lose in a clash, you die. The man screamed in terror after managing to dodge the attack at the last moment. Isaac pounced on his opponent forcefully, determined to end the fight this time. Terror possessed LeBlanc as she watched the scene, while Isaac was still immersed in the glow of his power. From Isaac's perspective, who didn't expect her reaction, the ecstasy of combat turned into shock. He wondered to himself in amazement if he looked that scary. As for LeBlanc, she had decided at that moment, while taking her notes, that it was wise not to mess with Isaac as well. Meanwhile, his opponent was jokingly begging him to leave him alone, arguing that he had a family waiting for him at home. But Isaac looked at him with clear boredom. All of this had become tedious for him. The man felt great relief and thanked him repeatedly for his leniency. LeBlanc also felt relieved that the matter ended there. Henry sighed and then called his next opponent, announcing that his turn had come. LeBlanc wondered about Henry's true strength, especially since she remembered how he was receiving beatings from an old man like Terramore. When the match resumed, he was surrounded by a strong blue aura as he calmly prepared. While LeBlanc was thinking that he wasn't that strong, Henry launched a sweeping attack that made his opponent scream in pain. The match was immediately declared over with a landslide victory for young Lord Henry. Shock hit LeBlanc, and she realized to herself that Henry was extremely strong. Her confusion increased. If he was this immensely strong, why did he allow Terramore to hit him? In another training session, where an old soldier asked Henry to continue, Henry was clearly taking hits, and LeBlanc realized that if he fought him seriously, Terramore would be dead. For even to her untrained eyes, his last opponent was much stronger than this old man. She couldn't understand what was happening, and confusion took hold of her. Those present began to whisper, expecting the young lord to be lenient with him because he was an old soldier, for it was unthinkable that he would be defeated easily like this. LeBlanc thought about this possibility, but she wasn't quite convinced. Suddenly, the soldier shouted angrily, warning Henry against underestimating him, and rushed toward him forcefully. Henry dodged the blow with difficulty, after it caused him a minor wound, and features of shock appeared on his face. Henry continued to parry the attacks, and tension appeared on his face. When the soldier managed to push him and force him to kneel, LeBlanc's eyes widened in fear as she realized he was going to get hurt, so she suddenly rushed in, screaming for him to stop. Henry looked in astonishment as he saw LeBlanc standing in front of him to protect him. LeBlanc stood between them, screaming at the soldier not to hit Henry, but he tried to justify the situation, saying it was just training. She interrupted him with enthusiasm and anger, emphasizing that what he was doing wasn't training, but rather he was hitting Henry because he was angry. The old soldier's movement stopped, and he looked shocked. He realized within himself that her words were true, for an attack fueled by anger is not training, but pure violence. The soldier offered a confused apology to the young lord, while Henry was watching him with a cold look that carried no expression. Henry interrupted the situation firmly, declaring that this was enough, then turned away, while LeBlanc was watching him as he left the training ground. Henry ascended a few steps, then stopped, and a complex look appeared on his face. LeBlanc ran toward him anxiously and asked him if he had been hurt. She began to circle him in panic, trying to examine his body for any injuries. Henry asked her in astonishment what she was doing, and she replied with insistence that she must apply medicine for him because he was injured. It occurred to her that he might be afraid of doctors, as he was still a child after all. She tried to reassure him and told him that The doctor was a kind man and there was no need to fear him, but Henry interrupted her angrily, strongly denying his fear of doctors, and shouted that he hated old people. His words shocked LeBlanc, and she began to recall something in her memory. When the words Henry and old man linked in her mind, the pieces of the puzzle began to interlock. Her memory went back to a conversation she heard about some people's hatred for the Doubled family, specifically the previous Duke, Cain Doubled, who was described as a monster. He was a demon who killed his second son, Chris, in front of his grandson, simply because Chris was limping, for he considered a defective child to be of no use. Here, LeBlanc realized the horrific truth. What if the grandson who witnessed that incident was Henry himself? Then it would be very natural for him to be traumatized by old people. No matter how intelligent he was just a child then. He saw that his trauma from old people was a weak point, and was obsessed with the idea that he would be killed if there was any defect in him. That old man was aware of Henry's psychological trauma. That's why Henry hid the abuse he suffered from the Duke, for if he had reported Terramore, his trauma would have been revealed to everyone. A fierce anger possessed her toward that despicable old man, but she tried to calm herself. She realized the smartest act was to remain silent, for Terramore was a member of Doubled's Council of Elders, and his word carried much more credibility than hers. Also, Henry wouldn't admit to it if she spoke, and in the end, she would look like a strange child. And in the worst-case scenario, she might be abandoned, but she couldn't ignore the matter. She realized that this was the worst part of being in a child's body. Her conscience couldn't leave her alone, so she stepped toward Henry and patted his head gently. He looked at her in astonishment, asking what she was doing. She smiled and told him she would protect him. Henry looked at her in surprise. Then LeBlanc thought to herself that she had no choice but to protect him. But in exchange for this protection, all he had to do was not disturb her during her stay with them. A cunning smile appeared on LeBlanc's face. She had determined to show him the wisdom of her fourth life and teach him a lesson he wouldn't forget. LeBlanc was sitting with Leah in a field full of violet flowers, and when Leah asked her if she loved her, LeBlanc answered innocently that they were beautiful. LeBlanc looked at Leah's watch, realizing that the time was nearing 4 in the afternoon. LeBlanc realized that that person she was waiting for would arrive soon. Then she pretended to feel cold, so Leah suggested they go inside the palace. But LeBlanc refused, announcing that she would make a flower wreath to give to Leah. Happiness and warm feelings overwhelmed Leah's heart from this innocent gesture. But in her heart, LeBlanc was planning something else, for she hoped she would be able to leave Leah behind. She looked toward the gate, where she saw the guards who would ensure her safety, so she confirmed that her plan was proceeding as it should. Leah offered to bring her a coat and a blanket to warm her, and LeBlanc agreed immediately. While Leah was heading back to the castle, LeBlanc remained alone in the garden. She smiled cunningly. After deciding to discipline Terramore for Henry's sake, she had to start with the first step. She recalled yesterday when North found her in front of the Duke's office and asked her why she was there. She answered him with a bright smile that she wanted to see the Duke. The aide admitted her to the office, announcing to the Duke the arrival of the child. The Duke carried her and placed her on his lap, asking what she was planning by coming here, and joked if she loved him that much. So she confirmed it to him, but her true goal was gathering information. She listened to the Duke's conversation with his assistant, where he asked about the progress in the proposal to establish a new advisory body. LeBlanc realized that if she stayed close to the Duke, she would be able to obtain information about Terramore. The Duke asked if there were any vacancies among the elders, and the assistant answered that they were watching each other, especially Lord Terramore and Lord Messing. LeBlanc's eyes sparkled at the sound of Terramore's name. North explained that these two had been sworn enemies for some time, and that the matter would turn into a silent war between them. LeBlanc realized with happiness that Terramore had enemies, and that if things went well, she wouldn't even have to intervene herself. She returned to the present and saw a man approaching her, and she realized with enthusiasm that he had arrived. He was from an ancient family that served the great elders of Doubled for generations. He was the head of the Messink family, Viscount Karn Messink. Messink was surprised to see the famous Child of Fate in this place. He approached her and asked what she was doing in this cold weather, the very question she was eagerly waiting for. She answered him with a playful smile that she was waiting for. Grandpa Terra. Messink was surprised by the name and asked if she meant Terramore, and she answered with confirmation and enthusiasm, adding that LeBlanc, Henry, and Isaac would receive lessons together. Messink burst out laughing mockingly, wondering what anyone could learn from someone like Terramore, describing his family as weak and him as an ignorant old man. LeBlanc insisted while shaking her head, rejecting his words, emphasizing that her grandpa was the best. Then she added with childish enthusiasm, to further fuel the situation, that he had told her he would soon wear a wonderful robe. That robe was the symbol of Doubled's elders, the dark purple robe. It was the same robe Messink was seeking. Shock hit Messink, and he asked if Terramore had truly said that, and LeBlanc answered confidently, confirming she heard it herself. Messink flared up in anger, refusing to believe this nonsense, considering this position to be his right. LeBlanc continued weaving her plan with feigned innocence, explaining that Terramore had told her that everything had been settled already, and that he would give the robe to her grandpa. Messink began to realize the gravity of the situation and wondered in panic if the head of the council was involved in the matter. Then LeBlanc delivered her final blow, claiming that Terramore had invited her to watch the The fool who thinks the robe is his while he sheds tears of blood. With a bright and innocent smile, she extended an invitation to him to join her in watching. Messink was completely flustered and began to stammer, trying to invent an excuse to leave, claiming he had some business he must attend to. While he was leaving in a hurry, LeBlaine waved to him enthusiastically, encouraging him, while hoping in her heart that he would go and fight Terramore with all his might for her. Elsewhere, the Council of Elders was in a state of turmoil because of the Duke's decision to establish a new advisory body, which would completely marginalize their role. Someone wondered if the council head, Jean-Marc Noyanuk, would sit idly by, but the council head replied calmly that his master's will was firm. While holding his wineglass, he added that a servant has no choice but to follow his master's orders. His words sparked the confusion of those present, so he explained his true meaning, declaring that they must wait for a new master who shared their views. Then he turned to Terramore, emphasizing that the young lords are the future of Doubled and must be taught with the utmost sincerity. But his look carried a deeper meaning, as he meant teaching them in a way that aligned with their own interests. Terramore answered him with a cunning smile, assuring him there was no need to worry, as all preparations were complete. Meanwhile, Messink was watching the situation from afar, his hand clenched in anger. Terramore was receiving congratulations from some nobles on obtaining the elder's robe and was feigning modesty, but in his heart he felt triumphant. The opportunity he had long awaited had come. He had been feeling bitter, for his family had always been ignored, and the youth had seized all opportunities. But this time, it was different, for he had gained the personal attention of the council head. His plan was simple. Training the young ones to fit his goals was easy, for Henry wouldn't be able to resist him because of his psychological trauma, and Isaac could be controlled with psychological pressure. Finally, the day he would become one of the elders came. Another person approached him, pretending to congratulate him, and asked him to remember him when he became an elder, and Terramore agreed, while Messink was mocking him. He saw that he was selling his family for a dream he hadn't yet realized. The other person replied nervously that according to seniority, the turn should belong to Terramore. Messink interrupted his speech mockingly, wondering if this alleged seniority had been built during his service as a servant in his own house. Shock appeared on Terramore's face while those present began to whisper, denouncing Messink's insolence toward a man older than him. But Messink continued his attack, considering that Terramore couldn't be blamed, for he still carried his old habits from when he was just a servant of his. Then he approached him and whispered in his ear in a threatening tone, expressing his amazement that someone who barely succeeded in serving him as a servant ends up becoming a teacher for the young lords, and that one truly lives to see wonders. He continued to approach him, whispering again and wondering how much he knew about his weak points. Terramore froze in his place, possessed by terror. Messink ended his speech with a poisoned piece of advice, warning him against coveting a position that exceeded his true status. Anger flared in Terramore's chest, and he vowed to himself that he would tear him apart and kill him. Meanwhile, LeBlaine was watching the scene from afar and had decided to see how far things would go. The conflict was raging between the followers of both Terramore and Messink, as Messink's team insisted that they couldn't entrust the future of Doubled to a teacher of questionable status and demanded a reconsideration of the appointment. The atmosphere was extremely tense. Messink smiled to himself. As expected of someone who became a candidate for the position of elder at such an early age, he truly knows how to play dirty games. He was manipulating public opinion, claiming that the education of the main house had always been entrusted to families that served as servants for more than 5 generations. He was also exploiting school and regional ties. If his late father knew that someone like Terramore would become an elder, he would rise from his grave. He provided another argument, claiming that since Terramore took over, young Lord Isaac's grades had dropped by 1.2%, and based on that, Terramore was absolutely unacceptable. Those present began to be convinced that Duke Messink would be a much better choice. LeBlaine felt very satisfied. She was happy to stir up this fight, as all eyes were now directed toward Terramore. With Messink's desperate attempt to exploit any weak point, Terramore wouldn't be able to approach Henry unless he was a fool. She hoped the two would collide and end up in a whirlpool of legal cases. The maids noticed her good mood and wondered why. Sisso claimed that the reason was her knowing she had brought her a new rocking horse, but the other interrupted her, emphasizing that the reason was the 3,000-piece puzzle she had brought, while Sisso insisted that the child would love the rocking horse more. So they decided to compete, and one of them vowed that if she lost, she would pluck out her eyes and play with them. While the maids were fighting, LeBlaine was pretending to enjoy her time. Later, she saw Isaac, who asked her if she was a normal child. She approached him and asked him where he was going, and he replied that he was headed to the training ground, and she asked him if he was also going there. He answered her with a boastful smile, explaining that his brother was retaking a test, but he had answered everything correctly, so he finished quickly. Astonishment hit LeBlaine, as she remembered how the servants used to talk in her previous life. They used to say that Isaac was outstanding, of course, but when it came to intelligence, Henry was far superior. Suddenly, she rushed toward the place where Henry was and heard the screams of the maids as they called her. She realized the truth immediately. It was impossible for Henry to fail a test that Isaac passed. They had intentionally left Henry behind, and it was clear who the perpetrator was. She ran quickly while screaming, only to find Terramore scolding Henry, who was kneeling before him. LeBlaine realized her initial assumption was wrong. She thought they were using violence as a means to brainwash and control Henry, but the truth was uglier than that. At that moment, Terramore approached her with a smirk and asked her in a mocking tone what brought her here during lesson time. LeBlaine looked at him with contempt and replied coldly that it wasn't lesson time, and that Henry had been beaten. Terramore laughed, considering what she said to be dangerous, and wondered mockingly how he could dare to hit a young lord. But LeBlaine confronted him firmly, emphasizing that she had seen everything with her own eyes. Terramore tried to deny the matter, claiming he hadn't done anything like that, but added in a wicked tone that if something of the sort had happened, it would have just been loving discipline. LeBlaine then realized his sick reality. He enjoys venting his inferiority complex as a commoner on a noble child. While he was asking her not to interrupt the lesson, LeBlaine quickly grabbed a pen from the desk and stabbed his hand without hesitation. He screamed in pain and blood splattered everywhere. Terramore grabbed his hand while screaming in her face, wondering about her audacity and how she dared do that. LeBlaine stood before him defiantly with Henry beside her, and returned his mockery with even harsher mockery, wondering what he thought, then added that she was fondling him with love, and called him a scoundrel. Henry looked at her with utter shock and amazement. Henry couldn't believe what he saw. Then LeBlaine turned to Henry and extended her hand to him, asking him to go. Henry remained frozen in his place, wondering in confusion about the reality of this child, but he eventually grabbed her hand and followed her as she left the room. Terramore remained alone, in pain and burning with anger. LeBlaine turned to him and whispered with a frozen smile for him to anticipate what would happen. Then she added that the Duke would soon know about his abuse of Henry. Darkness possessed Terramore's face as he thought of revenge. While she was leading Henry, she thought they should go to the doctor. But Henry pulled his hand away and asked her in panic if she was crazy and if she didn't feel afraid. He warned her that what she did would have dire consequences and that Lord Terramore was an evil man. But she answered him calmly and confidently that she wasn't afraid of him, because she knew what was more painful than physical violence, which is the wound that remains in Henry's heart. She continued her speech, emphasizing that she wasn't afraid of the bad person who hits Henry, for psychological pain is much deeper than the pain of an arm or a fever that lasts all night. For the constant fear of, what if I get hit again tomorrow, is what truly hurts. She herself had gone through this horrific experience, and that's why she couldn't ignore the matter. Then she kindly suggested that if he didn't like the doctor, they could go to the princess instead of him. Henry tried to evade, saying the matter was fine, but she insisted. If the child is in pain, it is not allowed. He pulled his hand away forcefully again, asking her not to interfere in his affairs and warning her against telling anyone what happened today. Henry stood before her for a moment, then turned to leave, still reeling from the shock. As for Terramore, he left the place fuming with rage, cursing the damn girl who had ruined everything. He tried to justify his actions by claiming he was merely disciplining Henry gently, but he couldn't stop thinking about that child, wondering how a 4-year-old could speak that way. Her gaze carried a dominant presence and a strength unbefitting of a child. In his imagination, she had transformed from the child of fate into a true demon. He concluded that the temple must have sent them a devil, for it was impossible for a child of such cunning to be the true child of fate. Despite this, he refused to surrender, defiantly questioning how he could lose to her. Determined to preempt any further moves, he headed straight to Duke Doubled's office and knocked on the door to announce his presence. However, he was taken aback by the Duke's angry reaction, as the Duke indignantly demanded to know how Lord Terramore could do such a thing. Panic seized Terramore's heart, believing that someone had already informed the Duke that he had assaulted Henry. Terramore tried to salvage the situation, pleading with the Duke to listen to him first, and wondering aloud what reason could possibly drive him to do such a thing. The attendees cast sharp glares at him. From the Duke's expression, Terramore realized he had indeed heard something. He then shifted the blame onto the child, claiming it was all her orchestration and that he would never dare do such a thing to the young master. But the Duke interrupted him coldly, asking which young master he was referring to. North looked confused by Terramore's words. Terramore continued his defense, claiming he was the victim in this situation, but he felt the atmosphere grow strangely tense. Then, the bitter truth dawned on him. He had fallen into the trap of that cunning brat. He had assumed she had already reported Henry's situation to the Duke. Her threat to tell the Duke had been mere bait, intended to make him panic and act suspiciously. All his plans collapsed as he realized the girl never intended to inform the Duke from the start. After all, how could she, when she had only been there for a few months and was sent by the temple, their arch-enemy? Compared to her, he was a servant who had served the Doubled family all his life. Clearly, he should have enjoyed more trust. Furthermore, Henry would not speak due to his psychological trauma, and no one would believe her even if she confessed. She had successfully made him look suspicious and drawn unwanted attention toward him. North interrupted him, saying they were originally discussing how he had shouted at the child over a trivial mistake, but it seemed there was more to it. Another added that without an underlying reason, he wouldn't have acted so suspiciously. Terramore finally realized he had been played. North declared the matter extremely suspicious, questioning how Terramore dared to fabricate such excuses. He demanded an investigation, asserting that until his innocence was proven, he could not be entrusted with teaching the young masters. Terramore looked to the Duke for help, but found only a cold, indifferent gaze. Terramore left the Duke's office burning with rage, cursing his luck. After everything had been going smoothly, it had all turned upside down. He turned suddenly to find Leblin standing behind him, and his anger flared as he pointed his finger at her, screaming. But Leblin met his rage with a sly smile, further infuriating him as he called her a damned brat. He threatened that he would not stay silent about what she had done, but she looked at him with feigned innocence, asking what he could possibly do. He continued his threats, declaring he would expose her true nature to everyone, that she was nothing but a demon sent by the temple. However, she responded in a deliberate, childish tone, calling him a foolish grandpa. With a cunning grin, she pointed out that he had admitted with his own mouth that he was hiding something, wondering who would believe him now that he had exposed himself. In that moment, Terramore realized that because of his reckless behavior, he had lost the trust of both the Duke and the Council of Elders. Even if he tried to reveal her truth, he would be dismissed as a liar. He completely lost control of his nerves and lunged at her, shouting obscenities. But she let him grab her hand with a playful smile, mockingly asking how he knew her nickname was Bitch. Then her features shifted into a threatening glare, clarifying that she bites when provoked. This left Terramore in a state of deep shock and terror. She glared sharply at his hand and ordered him to let go, threatening that she might break his other hand as well. She concluded that he had underestimated her for being a mere child, while he stared at her in a daze of defeat. Her memory drifted back to her past life when she was just a beggar roaming the back alleys. Because of that, the threats of a spoiled noble like him didn't shake her at all. What followed was a commotion even greater than the first, with voices rising to demand the suspension of Terramore's duties. One of the elders confronted the chairman of the council, ordering him out immediately. An official decision was issued to suspend Austin Terramore until the investigation was complete, forcing him to bow in shame. With this decision, the path seemed paved for Lord Messink to become the new elder, and things finally began to move as they should. Meanwhile, Messink spotted the young lady, Leblin. He approached her with a bright smile, asking if she needed anything. She answered affirmatively, wondering to herself why he was so happy to see her. He spoke to her with great kindness, assuring her that if anything bothered her, she should tell him immediately, which only increased her confusion at his strange behavior. He then told her he was in her debt, thinking to himself that she likely didn't understand the weight of his words. But she realized immediately that he believed she had helped him, and that she had unexpectedly won his favor. She decided to exploit the situation and determined to make him a permanent ally, especially after hearing from the maids that Lord Messink had scolded the bad grandpa. Lord Messink enthusiastically confirmed that he had reprimanded him severely and that he wouldn't dare show his face there again. Leblin clapped her hands with childish glee, expressing her awe, which charmed Lord Messink, who found her incredibly cute. Inwardly, she knew this was the social prowess of someone living their fourth life, and she decided she would become a wonderful adult like Lord Messink, while his subordinates looked at her with great admiration. Messink turned to leave, but before he did, he told her to come to him if she ever needed anything, leaving Leblin with a triumphant smile. Happiness washed over her, and she felt her relationship with Messink had strengthened. He and his followers bid her farewell, apologizing that they had a meeting to attend. After they left, she decided it was time to check on Henry. She crept cautiously toward his room, fearing he might be angry if she disturbed him again, so she decided to just take a quick peek. But as soon as she opened the door, someone grabbed her from behind and asked what she was doing, making her scream in fright. It was Henry and Isaac. Isaac mockingly asked if she was spying on them. She denied it quickly, claiming she was only looking. Isaac didn't see the difference between the two. Leblin was conflicted. If she told Henry she came to check on him, he might get angry again, but at the same time, she couldn't stop herself from coming. She recalled a conversation she overheard among the maids, saying that Terramore would come to the castle today for the investigation. Although the young masters denied being harmed, the maids were worried. What was to stop a madman from doing it again? Thus, she resolved not to let him get near Henry again. But Isaac interrupted her thoughts mockingly, concluding she was there because of the rumors spreading. She realized then that Isaac wasn't stupid. If she hadn't come to see him, it was natural to assume she came for Henry. However, he completely surprised her when he assumed she had heard they were getting cake today. Leblin was stunned, wondering if Isaac was a fool after all. Isaac continued boastfully, assuring her there was no need to rush as there was plenty of cake. At that moment, Leblin completely forgot about Henry. All she could think about was cake, as she was starving from thinking too much like an adult lately. Isaac feigned indifference, claiming he hadn't kept the cake specifically for her, while Leblin insisted he had. He then tried to justify it by saying he didn't like sweets, to which Leblin enthusiastically agreed. But she suddenly interrupted him, reminding him that he had loved the sugar cakes the day before, leaving Isaac deeply embarrassed. Leblin felt relieved seeing that Henry didn't seem in pain and that there were no side effects from what happened. The brothers turned to get the cake while Leblin watched them. Then she sat down to enjoy the delicious piece of cake. Isaac looked at her smiling and asked if it was really that tasty. Leblin thanked him gratefully, tears in her eyes from happiness. The taste reminded her of her miserable life as a beggar, where eating something like this might have given her a heart attack. Isaac surprised her by asking if she wanted more tomorrow morning, and she happily replied that he was the best. He then promised to give her some of his dinner portion as well, making her even more excited as she called him wonderful. He didn't stop there, promising her even more the next day. She looked at him with deep appreciation, and in her eyes he seemed to glow. Henry commented that it wasn't that big of a deal, while Leblin thought to herself that anyone who gives her cake is a good person. Isaac and Henry continued to watch Leblin enjoy the cake with pure joy. However, this peaceful moment was soon interrupted by the arrival of the maids, who were peeking from behind the door, laughing softly. Later, while the brothers were studying, Henry was writing with concentration while Leblin struggled with sleepiness. Henry noticed her fatigue and advised her to go to bed. But Leblin, watching from a distance, rejected the idea. She knew Terramore could appear at any moment, and she had to protect Henry. Even though her eyes were heavy with sleep, she decided to go wash her face to refresh herself. Then she went to Isaac and whispered something in his ear, and he agreed to her request. Leblin sighed from exhaustion. She was truly tired from thinking like an adult all day, and staying up late only made it worse. She continued down the dark hallway, remembering the bathroom was in that direction. But suddenly, a strong hand grabbed her from behind, and a malicious voice asked if she really thought he would only go after Henry. It was Terramore. He tried to drag her away violently, but she resisted. She screamed at him that she wasn't like Henry. She wasn't trained, and any trace of his power on her would be detected immediately. But he mocked her threat, saying he didn't need to use his hands to torture someone. He then pulled out a blue gemstone. It was a blue spinel, a special stone used to extract divine power and craft holy tools. The darker the color, the more power could be drained. While it was considered a precious stone in the market, for the person being drained, it was a nightmare. If divine power is drained to the limit, the result is either death or madness. Terror seized her. In that moment, she preferred death and moving to another life over going insane. As for Terramore, he was in a state of delirium. He had lost his position as a teacher and been abandoned by the chairman, all because of her. She realized he had completely lost his mind and tried to back away while threatening to scream. But he mocked her, challenging her to scream and questioning which would be faster, the arrival of help or the extraction of her divine power. At the moment he was about to touch her with the stone, a powerful voice commanded him to leave her alone. It was Henry who intervened, striking Terramore's hand with force. Leblin was shocked. She knew Henry suffered from psychological trauma and didn't think he could stand up to Terramore. Henry grabbed Terramore's arm, but the latter pushed him away violently. He then grabbed him by his clothes, calling him trash. In a sudden move, Leblin rushed forward to protect him, screaming at Terramore not to dare touch Henry. Suddenly, the room door shattered. Duke Doubled appeared, surrounded by an aura of power and fury. Panic struck Terramore as he wondered how the Duke got there. Leblin mocked him in her mind, wondering if he really thought she would wander around alone after provoking him so much. She had asked Isaac to bring the Duke. She hadn't stayed awake this late just to protect Henry. She had predicted he would come after her in the dead of night. This was the end for Terramore. Those present watched the scene in shock, unable to believe what was happening. Terramore was trembling with rage while Leblin tried to protect Henry, who had fallen to the ground behind her. Terramore tried to explain the situation to the Duke, but his words were stuttering and incoherent. The Duke unleashed his power, making Terramore scream in pain and terror. Meanwhile, Messink was cursing to himself. He realized a subordinate of the council had mistreated a direct heir of the family. This was a major incident that could bring down the entire council, but he knew they wouldn't give up easily. In the worst-case scenario, a civil war might break out. The Duke called out to Henry, who looked at him tensely. He then asked him to tell him what happened himself. Henry tried to evade, claiming it wasn't worth mentioning, but the Duke interrupted him firmly, asserting that the judgment in this matter belonged to him alone. Terramore flared up in anger, screaming that it was all a misunderstanding and he would explain. But in a sudden move, the Duke used his magical power to attack him again, causing him to scream in pain. Leblin herself was shocked, realizing this was a non-verbal magic activation, wondering if such a thing was truly possible. She looked at the Duke with admiration, realizing what he did was truly amazing. Henry dismissed the matter as trivial, but the Duke confronted him angrily, asking how he could describe violence as trivial. Henry explained to the Duke that he had planned to observe Terramore's ridiculous behavior for longer. The Duke concluded that Henry wanted to say he would exploit Terramore's weakness once he became a member of the Senate. He then added in an icy tone that he hated liars, especially if the liar was his own son. He called Henry's name again, appearing deeply enraged. But Leblin intervened, hugging the Duke tightly and screaming for him not to do it. Everyone looked at her in shock. Leblin grabbed the Duke's leg and pleaded, saying Henry was scared, that the Duke was scaring him, and that she was scared too. She then thought to herself that she must be crazy to cling to a monster who uses magic without a chant, and that crawling into a lion's mouth would be less terrifying. Even though she was trembling with fear, she held her ground, for Henry was still just a young child. Henry began to run away from them. Leblin ran after him, calling his name anxiously, but he stopped her suddenly, screaming at her to leave him alone. She tried to calm him, assuring him he wasn't a defective product. She added that she too was afraid of sharp things and frogs, and that being afraid wasn't a flaw. Leblin grabbed Henry's arm, promising to protect him. He looked at her for a moment, appearing moved by her words. But his cold gaze soon returned as he remembered someone saying the doubled family didn't need defective products. She tried to take him to the Duke, but he pushed her hand away violently, screaming at her, asking who had asked her to do that. He continued shouting, asking who she thought she was to interfere in his business, and if she really thought they were real siblings just because she was adopted. He then added harsh words, stating that no one considers an orphan who doesn't share a single drop of blood as a family member. Finally, he ordered her to get out of his sight. His words struck Leblin with profound shock, leaving her standing alone as he left the place.